test.
No, mine works.
No, it's not for that, Mayor, it's the,
Right, test, test. We are ready to go, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Sabino.
Thank you. So as I was stating, this budget here is going to go into second reading to the board. So it's not official until the board has reviewed all the requested changes. At first reading, the budget was cut to the material amount. And this reflects the cuts, and as a second reading, which will be, I believe, February 22nd. The board may make this official. I just want to make sure that this could change, and more than likely the third reading will again change it. So regional districts are a lot different, completely different than municipalities. They are created the same way as municipalities through the letters patent. The lieutenant governor states through the letters patent the boundaries, our boundaries, just as they state the boundaries for you. There's a taxing authority for municipalities, which we don't have, and I'll speak to that in a few minutes. There are 9 electoral areas and 6 municipalities, so there's 15 members, plus we've got the Pacific and Indian band on contract. We're still negotiating, we're renegotiating the contract that they are partners in a number of services, including the hospital. The contract isn't signed yet, but it looks very positive that they're going to re-sign it for 2024 through 2028. Next. So regional districts, as I stated, are not taxing authorities. We tell the province how much to tax on our behalf, where you tax directly. For that privilege, we have to pay, the taxpayer has to pay 5.25%. That for 2024, I'm projecting $959,000. That's something that I hope to change. Under the community charter, we're not taxing authorities as stated. However, we're going to try to lobby to see if we can become tax authorities. It's going to mean some changes where I would have to ask for 2 more staff members, but we would save $500,000 a year. I'm estimating it costs $400,000 a year to run a new taxing department, but with the savings of $500,000 a year, that's a lot of money that can be taxpayers can save. So as I stated, next. So some regional districts services are legislated. That means that you as a municipality don't have the option to opt in or out. You have to be part of it, such as emergency 911, telecommunications, waste management services. These are the services that all 15 participants pay, and they pay. You pay also by assessment. And later on, we'll be talking about how changes in assessment affect your portion of the taxes. So again, as I stated, municipalities are again different in that you have 3 to 5 budgets. We have 162 services, so we have 162 budgets. A lot of people are amazed that it's 1,063 pages of budget, but it comprises of 26 different schedules. Each schedule has a different information on it. So if you picture a pyramid, the tip of the pyramid essentially is 1 page. It gives you all of the information. So some directors may just be interested in that. It's their option. Other directors want to see the whole 1,063 pages. So the base of the pyramid tells you everything. And in between, it's up to the director to see how much information they want. One of the schedules, I believe, for yours would be F4. It has just your information. So it takes 1,063 and pulls out only the ones that affect your facilities. Excellent. Budget, pretty well similar to yours, starts in June. And so in a few more months, we'll be starting the 2025 budget. We now have what I call a baseline budget. where when I first came in here, the operational capital budget were together on one sheet. So we had 162 services, as I stated, we had 162 budgets. Now we have 162 operational services and up to 162 capital budgets, just because they're on two different sections. And anything on the capital budget is only funded from either reserves, grants, donations, and borrowing. And I'll talk about that further. You, as a municipality, have to do your budget before May 15th. We have to do it before March 31st. Again, because we're not a taxing authority. So I can say that we have a more complicated budget and less time to do it in. And if we become a taxing authority, I would like to have that May 15th deadline also. These are the services that we have a number of different services. One of them is regional. Regional services are where the majority of 15 participants participate in. And so you're paying into emergency 911, which is mandatory. But there's other services that aren't mandatory, but you as a service participant have voted to be part of it. And then we pay for your share by assessment value. Again, higher your assessment goes, that's a positive thing for your clients, your taxpayers, but not a positive thing when they pay the taxes. Right. These are more services for the regional services. Again, I just wanted to show how much there are. There's another service is rural services. That's something that you would participate in. You have your own bylaw, you have your own planning department. However, those services that you don't have, you contribute to our services and economies of scale. So you would pay into that. Other services are local services. A local service example would be the fire department. We've got a fire department just up the road here and this mountain. That is for a specific area and only those people pay. And there's shared services again, a fire department like Kearneas. They serve Kearneas, they serve Victoria D, which is between Osoyoos and Costin, as some of you may know, and Victoria G, which is between Kearneas and halfway towards Princeton. So they serve three different areas, and again, they pay by assessment. This is just more for effect to show you the services that we have. So for the majority of these, because some services don't have capital, but for most of those services, there's a corresponding capital component. These are the services that you participate in. So at one point, a director in the past has gone to the public and said, these are the services that we want to be in. So with that, you're in there and you pay for your share of the arena, where it's an arena museum. That's a partnership that you have between regional district themselves. And again, that's based on assessment. On the arena budget, essentially comes from your staff, your finance staff. And it's just, we take it and we just put it into our budget. We collect the money on your behalf. And then we transfer it over to the arena budget, and your staff then does whatever operating capital component that's involved. The requisition, at the very bottom where it says requisition from other regional boards, those are submitted to us. The board doesn't have any choice. Whatever it is, it is. And I had to do a little bit of poking on the weekend because as of Saturday, I had not received their budgets. As of Monday, I got them. So sometimes you just have to do a little reminder. The staff that stated we start the budget in June. It's a 5-year budget, just like yours, where the current year is essentially the taxing year. There's another 4 years. So what happens is in a lot of times, like here, the budget isn't passed yet. However, in 2023, the 2024 budget was essentially passed, so we can start doing operating. The board will not allow capital budgets or any special operation extra ads unless it's an early approval. So that's something I brought into the organization so that we're competing on capital projects against some of the bigger municipalities. So you want to try to get ahead of the game, because if the bigger municipalities start to get ahead of you, the other companies that are bidding, they're not as hungry. And I found that very useful. So it's a city that I live in right now that essentially what I'm competing against, but ultimately it's our taxpayer that I'm trying to save money. So next. We had two budget workshops, as I stated earlier, which was December 6th and 16th. From there, the staff took direction from the board on where there should be changes. Changes were made, the first reading was done. After first reading, the board saw the consequences of what the staff had asked for, and they asked for a large number of FTEs, full-time equivalents. Now, just so that, to be fair, of the full-time equivalents that they're asking, it was a catch-up on the utility system. We have 10 water systems, and they've been growing exponentially since I've been there, which is 3.5 years this time, because I was at the regional district 14 years ago before. There was no major asks in that, so we were falling behind on repairs and infrastructure. So the five took care of that, and then we have a decentralized purchasing system where every single manager does their own purchasing. And that is not very efficient because we don't have a card to scale, we don't have a consistency. So there's a purchasing manager also included in a 0.5 staff member because there's more demands on finance and requirements from the province. We added another 0.5 to help staff and reduce overtime. Thanks. So the factors affecting the 2024 requisition. So property assessment, as I've been stating, is a major factor. Just as you tax your taxpayer based on their assessment, we determine how much each of the 15 participants have to pay. And then of the 6 municipalities, they take that and then rebill based on how much we've asked for. Now, there is a restriction in that you as a municipality can have your multiplier for taxes. You can change it to reflect any increases in assessment. So if it's residential goes up materially and the businesses go down, you can change it so that you're taxing essentially the same amount from year to year. We can't. So in what I've been noticing for the regional district is residential property has been going higher up in assessment than business and other. So the residential has been getting hit, but I can't change it just because I can't, with the community charter, it doesn't allow us. So for you, for 2024, your share of the regional district expenses that you pay as a whole is 8.4. It was 8.19, so it did go up slightly. So in a way, you're the property owners in the town of Vesuvius, the individual properties went up higher than it was last year. So you're paying more, which in turn the taxpayer pays more. So the average assessment, including non-market growth, it was 5.52, but the average of the regional district was 0.94. You can see how that was, I think that was a correction. So just remember, this is comparison as to the regional district. So this is something municipalities don't normally notice because you don't compare other municipalities as a whole and the regional district electoral areas. So town of Vesuvius also had a non-market growth of 1.21 and the average one was 1.49. So it was a bit lower. Non-market growth, for those of you that don't know what it is 1 year we'd be taxing on an empty piece of land, and let's say it's $100,000. Now there's a house on there. That house is now worth $400,000. So now we're taxing $500,000. So you have a broader range for assessments. So you're spreading that butter over a longer period, so less people pay. And one of the things I brought to the organization, and I'm not sure if you do that here, is when we say that your average tax assessment is, we show before the non-market growth and then after, so that very transparent. And some municipalities just like to quote, this is what it's, whatever percentage you're saying it is. I don't know when, so Bentic tells me my taxes went up 5.5%. I don't know if that's before non-market growth or after, but that makes a big difference. Next. This is very graphic. Anything above that line, the straight line, that's the average for the assessment increase in the whole regional districts. Where you see the peaks, those peaks are where the assessments went above average, which means your share went up. So what this means is if your taxes or if your budget was exactly the same last year to this year, but your assessment increased, you're paying more. So it doesn't matter how efficient you are in reducing the budget, those peaks are paying more regardless. That dip, that 3.28, and that's Victoria, which is, if you know Penticton, that's the West Bench. Their services are no less than what they were previous year, but the taxes would be not as high. This is the consolidated TIP budget. So this shows that the budget is $85.71 million. That is 48 million is operating. And when it says annual debt repayment, that's all 6 municipalities and 9 metro areas. So it's not just the one, us or you. The capital budget is the 25 million, I think, or 29 million. So of the budget as stated, it's 48.81 million for the operating, the capital is 29.29. There's a table that shows how that's allocated. The total budget or extra position for 2024 is 26.1 million. Of that, the total budget, if we were one municipality and as a whole, and we took everything and lumped it into one, after non-market growth, we're looking at 7.09%. And that is with high peaks and valleys where we've got some municipalities that are paying a lot more, like the Pentictons of the world. I'm doing their presentation next week, 14% increase. Why? Because one of the philosophies that changed between the previous CAO and myself is, first of all, the board decided to hire a CPA as a CAO. So CPA and we wanted to change the way that the services are funded. Regional districts should be fund all of their services separately. They've got to be self-sustaining. And with that being self-sustaining, it allows the protection of the citizens that pay for that service so that you can't have one service, participants in one service saying take money from the other. And that's actually one of the awesome things that the government has in the Local Government Act is the protection of those services. This graph here, this not graph, I'm a graph person. This slide here shows on one page exactly what you pay for the common services. So there's some services that for instance, in electoral areas, that they don't always pay that number because they don't always have the same service. One example would be, I did a presentation on Sunday with Cleveland. They have Apex, they have Twin Lakes, they have Cleveland, and they have St. Andrew by the Lake. They have 4 areas, but not all 4 areas pay for everything. Now, the fire department in Cleveland does not, the people there don't pay for Apex and vice versa. So that's just one example. This is just a general overall example when all the services are paid for common services. You'll see in yellow there, the first nations there, PIB, they're at 0% right now. I'm hoping to have a contract signed in the next week or so, which then that will change, and it's a fair contract, I believe, and it's something more than renewing it. Support costs for administration. So every single municipality, every single local government has a admin cost. This is a support cost, and the support cost is to keep the lights on. So in those 5 services, which is common throughout, I'd be surprised if yours is much different than ours. It doesn't include the wages because the wages are important and we charge it to where it's actually used, but it includes the actual support costs. So we need licenses for computers, we need the photocopy machine, that kind of thing. That's the kind of expense that we have. The biggest single expense in the administration support costs is information services. Information services has been growing exponentially, and I've committed to the board that I will be bringing a recommended formula to take out the information services and charge it back on a per use basis. And then the board can see, we'll adopt this budget as presented at 3rd reading, and then I'll do a what if, call it a what if budget in that. What will happen if we change the way that we charge the admin costs? And this is it's very graphic. You can see on the far right, the hard numbers where that blue is the IT, and you can see how much it's increased from year to year. And how much more it is. So that's something I think that might be a better way. We're looking every year to see if we can change it and have it be more efficient in the way we charge it. I'm in the process right now of doing a review on some of the charges, and I've already have a few recommendations, and one of them affects municipalities. And that's not something I did. I've talked to the board. This is what's new. What's new is what's in the what's not in the budget yet. That's going to be after we do the presentations. Board always listens to grant and aids, and that's the company, not the companies, but the nonprofit agencies that come and ask for funds. There's specific restrictions for that. It doesn't make it into the budget until the board accepts it. The other thing that's not in the budget until the board accepts it is requests for full-time equivalent staff. So that is new utility departments, whether asset management, etc. And I'll talk about that in a bit. And capital requests for the full-time equivalent and the capital requests, managers are now required to do a business plan. So that business plan not only states why the ask is there, but also the 5-year consequence. And one example that I'll use is a number of years ago, Naramata purchased a park. So they went to the bylaw, borrowed the money, there's debt servicing. And along with that, though, 2 years later, there's operating capital requirements. Well, that report that asked the first year, it should have that, so there's no surprises. So as soon as the budget is passed with those requests, those extra costs enter in the budget today, not 3 years from now and 5 years from now. So that's mandatory. Program change requests. A program change request is where I'm using examples. We have a park where staff cuts the grass twice a month. And all of a sudden, we have staff member that, oh my gosh, we should have 3 times a month. Well, that's fine, they ask for it, but the board has to accept it and pay for it, and the taxpayer has to pay. So again, they have to fill out a business plan. The business plan says the consequences too, because that also has a FTE requirement to act and ask. So then the board says yes or no. It does not make the budget until after the board approves it. And they can change their mind right up until 3rd reading. This is an example. This is an example for this last year for the regional grant and aids for the nonprofits. There was 4 asks. There's 2 were tentatively accepted, because again, the board can change that at the last minute. One of them is a nonprofit radio station that's out of Penticton, and the other one is called DB Foundation for Health Research, which helps dementia patients. So that's the dementia patient one, the $10,000. I'm going to be talking to the board. IHA has something similar, and what they both do is it's called memory cafes. And if the board gives funds to that, I'm going to be recommending that there be a condition set that they communicate and cooperate with IHA. Otherwise, the board will be giving funds to a competitor, and is that the proper thing? So your director, my director, your mayor will be part of the decision factor on that part of it. This is the full-time equivalent request that the staff asked for. So on the far right, there's a rating. My right is a rating that senior staff rated the importance of the asks. The board initially stated, put them all in there, so it was a tentative, and then when they saw the consequences, they quickly adjusted a lot of them. The majority of the asks were for utilities, as I stated, and there was, like I said, the purchasing manager and FTE, but like I said, the majority was something that was important to keep up the utility. But there was a subcommittee for protective services. Protective services has now in there 2 new asks, a senior manager and one of the they call it program coordinator. These are everything in yellow. The board decided to cut. They said, okay, these things there based on the information that they received subsequent to the first reading. They can wait and they can be relooked at next year. Staff can only ask for 2025 for staff that was projected this year. On top of these 4 that were rejected, there's 2 other positions that were cut, and not any loss of positions. There's one was not filled and another one was not backfilled. So altogether, there were 6 positions that the board decided to remove from the budget. This is just to show the impact on what would have happened if all 15 were accepted. Everything in yellow is user fees, and that would be water. Everything else would have been taxes. So there was a huge cut. If on the right, there's a number there, 756,000. At first reading, that was in the tax system, and it would have been tax separate based on assessment on each of the municipalities. That was cut dramatically. Now, the next part of it is capital. So as I stated, there's now two budgets, an operating and capital. The capital component has already been taxed. There is no additional tax directly. Indirectly, it's taxed in that there's a transfer to operating, and then it's used to fund capital, the capital component. So all the reserves in the capital are used for capital projects, also grants, donations, borrowing, gas tax, and just as you received the community growth fund, we did too. So there are for 1 year, well, we have 5 years. I don't know if you have 5. Our rules are different than your rules for the community growth fund. So we have the more stricter rules. In the current budget, 4.3 million is going back to reserves. So 8.83% of the operating budget is reserve expenditures. This is RDUS dollars at work. What you're going to start seeing is whenever we have an RDUS capital project, you're going to be seeing a sign. A lot of times when we do work, a lot of people think it's the province, or if it's next to your borders, it's yours. You get the credit for it. And so I'm taking that away from you. And I'm just going to have the RDUS dollars at work. So these are the next listing are capital projects that and I say yours, the regional district clients that live in Osoyoos, you will tax on our behalf. So it's not the Osoyoos taxpayers, it's the regional district taxpayers, and that's important. A lot of individuals thinking we're taxing you, we're not. We're taxing, just as I'm a Canadian that lives in British Columbia, that's been taken, I'm also a regional district. So general government, these are the capital assets. Also regional trails, which you are part of. Anytime you see something in yellow, there is a carry forward. So the work was promised in 1 year. And in some cases, there's reasons to have it transferred over, carry forward. In other cases, I'm going to need to know why. Just to backtrack a bit, staff created a Gantt chart system that we have 342 commitments to the board. We now track those commitments and the board sees where we're at on an ongoing basis. Right now, I'm committed that the board will see it on a monthly basis, every second meeting. I am going to be looking at doing it every meeting, and the board is actually going to have access to it electronically so that if there's special projects that the board is interested in, they can go right to those. So also I've linked the success of that chart to the wages, the increased wages on a yearly ongoing basis. So now it's incentive driven. So the more successful we are, I want to have a promise made. I want that fulfilled. So I don't want to have over promising and delivering. I want to promise and deliver. 911, this is one of the only areas in the budget where we've asked the board, and I've asked for early approval on this because it has to go to assent and has to go to the board for borrowing. We're at 662,000 we're looking at borrowing. One of the things that I'm nudging each of the directors in every one of these meetings is there's a $75,000 increase in transfer to reserves in the emergency budget, 911 budget. I'm recommending why not take that 75,000 and take that as a huge hit in 1 year. That's a 75,000 increase and move it, add it to the borrowing so that when we do the debt servicing, it's split over a number of 15 or 20 years. I suspect 20 years. And you're saving that percentage of that you're paying overall for each year you're saving. But particulars of the world will say 40% with 75,000, along with whatever everybody else is saving. So that's something I'm hoping that one of the board members might recommend. I think there might be 10 recommendations right now that I've done 10 of these. So capital budgets continue, the information services, you can see why it's so expensive. Just for 2024, we've got a $504,000 upgrade. And what you don't see, because it's in operating, there's a $350,000 licensing fee just to have the licensing for the computers. And that, where it went, where you used to buy the software, and it was your software, you don't buy it anymore. You sort of lease it, you rent it. So that they have us. So the overall requisition for 2024, your requisition is 1.1 million. The tax requisition has increased to 107,000. The major increases, and this, I just thought you'd be interested in it. So 35,000 is general government, 911, 17,000, that will drop. The board it reduces that 75,000 I was talking about. And emergency planning is 35,000. The main reason you see the increases in emergency services and emergency planning is my philosophy is what the province says. Each service should be self-sustaining, pay its own way. That wasn't the case. What was happening before is the electoral area men was supporting those costs where the majority of the staff was being charged to the electoral area men, where it should have been charged to those two services. So this is I won't call it an error correction, I'll call it a change in philosophy in that I am by, if you knew me, you know me, I'm by the book. The book says services are self-sustaining and pay their own way. So I did that. I will be looking at the rest of the organization on an ongoing basis. This is a summary of the budget as it stands when second reading is passed. Overall, like I said, the bottom far right, you see a 7.09%. So that's the increase, and that has an increase because of there's two extra protective services manager. That's part of it. Otherwise, that would be dropping to under 7, so in the 6.5%. And there's other increase. The purchasing manager, I'm expecting to save money because of economies of scale. And one of the things that I'm offering up to the municipalities that don't have a purchasing manager is that we'll offer the service of the purchasing manager at cost. You're a member municipality, we shouldn't be making a profit off of you. So if you only pay when you use them, and I have been having some interest in that. So I didn't ask for early approval because I want to keep the wages down. So I don't need to budget for his wages or her wages until we're looking probably May or June, but more likely May. This is the tax requisition for your area, and the first section you'll see that it is an 87,000 increase, and what I stated is general government, general 911 emergency services are the biggest increases, but there's also a decrease. Solid waste management, that's $8,200. So it's not always increased. Where we see an opportunity, we will decrease it. And this is the last part. You're still part of the regional district, the arena. That's actually your budget. So if you have an issue with 11,000, you have to talk to your staff about that. And this is just, and it's on, you've got this, there's a lot to it. It shows the impact as the tax requisition stands at second reading. It shows the impact by property value. Now, I stress this more likely will change at second reading and again at third reading. This is something that I created. This just shows the tax impact of who pays what, and the more services you pay, the more you're going to, the more services you have, the more you pay. Electoral deeds, okay, false. They are as close to being a municipality without being a municipality as can be. So they have a lot of services, so they're going to pay the most. Penticton has always been quasi third highest. They have a lot of services, but not as many as everyone else. But because they have 40% of the asset of the assessments, they're going to pay a lot. So one of the things I was asked for is, can we take a look how fair that is? So I created a cost per capita. The more people you have, yes, you have a lot more assessment, but that's because you have more people that benefit from our services. So the Pentictons of the world went from third highest in paying to third lowest. So that's something I think shows the fairness of the way that we do things. And with that, thank you. The previous slide showed my email, phone number. I take questions right up to March 7th, which then I will take to the board. The biggest concerns I've had so far is water infrastructure. And one of the things for the water infrastructure is we're in the process of doing an asset management plan, similar to what every municipality has to do. And once we're finished, we'll be taking a look at where we should be and where we're at. And one of the things that did bring up at one of the workshops is we need to start looking at the infrastructure because water is essential to life. And the sewer, we have 10 water systems and 2 sewer systems. The rest are on septic tank. So we need to keep the water flowing, and those areas that have the sewer system and the treatment plant, we gotta keep that going. And we'll be looking at how much we need to determine to keep all the services up and running. And when I was in West Kelowna, I did the same thing. We looked at we did our assets, we were ahead of schedule there, and we determined how much we need and how much we could afford. And with that, I will be bringing back a recommendation to the board, not for this budget, but coming soon, how much we need to start collecting. And one of the things that you have the capability of, and we don't yet, but I won't try to get it, is I want to have a line where it's infrastructure, not repairs, upgrade. So there's 2 types of capital reserves. There's one where it's new reserves, new infrastructure, new water mains, new sewer. But also there's another one where it's repairs. We need to have the money set aside for repairs. There's times when it costs more not to repair something than it is to repair it. Just because you're paying staff in the middle of the night to repair a water main, and we've had that happen. Maybe we don't want that. It's also dangerous if you have a bursted water main, you're gonna flood also. So I just want to let you as a council know that that's also going to be coming. Monty Director, you're there, so no surprises. And I'm available, please answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabino. That's a very complex budget that you have, budgets, 160 of them, and 62 that you have to deal with. And we thank you for presenting this to us and giving us an overview as well as being specific to Vesuvius. I'm just going to see if any of the council have questions for you. Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question. We kind of supply water and sewer from the north end of the lake to the border, and I guess we're responsible for our areas for repairs. Is there any opportunity to partner with you or get grants from you to offset some costs if we have a major repair in those areas?
Go ahead.
So that it would have to be a service, would have to be created through bylaw, where the board would have to allow that to happen. However, if it's a win-win situation, I see that happening. But if it's just a situation where it's just a way for us to fund your infrastructure, I'll be honest, as the CAO, ex-CFO, no.
Thank you. Councillor Chong.
Thank you. Just for some clarification, regarding the property tax multiplier, if the RDOS becomes a taxing authority, then would you have the ability to modify the multiplier?
Go ahead.
That's the goal. When I take it, if this happens before I take it to the province, I would have to have consensus from all of the board members that there would be one multiplier. Like, you're not gonna have one different in Kalihi versus Apex, etc. I would recommend that because that's the best way to solve the problems. Just so that they see that board would be united and have no issues. So what I would do is, I would look at the revenue policy. You as a municipality by law have a revenue policy. We as a regional district don't have to have one. However, I did do one for the regional district. Except there's a few things like I don't have to look at the tax multiplier because we don't have the authority. But I would do it if I did have the authority. Right now, I would have to, based on the way it is, I'd have to do 162. But if we become a tax authority, I just have to do one. And I just had a director ask me to do something similar. And if I hire another person in finance, I could be able to do it. But I told them in a nice way that it'll be on a work plan, but no time commitment. Just right now we're too busy. But yes, we would be able to change it, but not right now.
Another question, I think it was slide 22, with the line graph with the set point with the assessment change in the cities was at 5.5, is that relative to, is 0.92 the set point average for all RDOS, and that's more like a standard deviation?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's correct.
okay, so it's all relative to RDOS.
It's relative to IUS, so that's something that you wouldn't see, because why would you want to do, look at Princeton and take a look at it in Nirvana? That's my job, is to take a look at that. And again, I brought that in just to show how significant a material change could be if you're above average or below average for those increases.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that has a question? No, okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sabino. I know that this is one of 15 that you have to do in the regional district, and everybody's is slightly different. So I'm hoping you can take some of this and apply it to everybody. I'm sure you can. Thank you very much for doing this and for bringing me as well.
And thank you for having me. I will stay at CAO for the presentation with Mr. Garish, but I've got 2 other meetings, one Oliver and one Penticton, so sorry, Chris.
No problem. Thank you very much. So we now have some staff reports, delegation and LUP, land use procedures updates, and we've had several of these delegations to go through, and we're going to ask Mr. Garish, who is the planner for the regional district and who is working with the town of Vesuvius, to go ahead, and he has some presentations because he's really good at putting these together at the regional district and coordinating it. So thank you. Welcome, Chris, and thank you. Go ahead, please.
Wait for the, for the slide to come up. I'm in control now.
You
There
should
we go.
be, yes, you should be.
Perfect. All right, great, thank you. So the first discussion paper before you is as you indicated in relation to, I think essentially the underlying theme is delegation, and then more property development permits themselves. So there's a number of different issues before you. And I thought I'd just start off with some basic background context for council's benefit as to what these bylaws are, why you have them, what the changes are that we're proposing. So under the Local Government Act, which is basically what generally rules land use planning for local governments, any council that's adopted a zoning bylaw or an official community plan has to set out procedures under which a property owner who's been affected by those bylaws can apply to you either for an amendment to that bylaw or the issuance of a permit. And once those types of applications come in, you as a council have to consider them. There's no discretion there. I mean, you obviously have discretion to make a decision as to whether you approve it or refuse it, but you have to consider it. And then the other bylaw we're touching on is the delegation of authority bylaw. So that one comes under section 154 of the community charter, and it gives you as a council the ability to delegate, in this case, to employees of the municipality the ability to act on your behalf and issue certain permits. And so in this case, that's been done in relation to development permits. And again, similar to the land use procedures bylaw, when you delegate, you also have to set out rules or goalposts by which people can appeal a delegated decision to you if they're not happy with what staff has done. And so these are just your 2 bylaws that you have. So you have your land use procedures bylaw from 2007, and more recently your delegation authority bylaw from 2018. So as I've kind of indicated in previous slides, there has been a previous decision in relation to the delegation of development permits, and I suspect because of the age of the bylaw, that's within your land use procedures bylaw, and it's specifically to your director of development services. As council is aware, that position is currently vacant, which calls into question the ability for staff to continue to issue delegated DP. So in order to clear that up, we're proposing the council consider 2 amendments. One to the land use procedures bylaw to remove that delegation, but really it's a transfer, and then the second amendment will be to your delegation authority bylaw, and to introduce the delegation there, and to retain it for the director of development services position, even though it's vacant, but also to expand it to include the CAO so that permits can continue to be issued by staff. while there's a vacancy. Now, I'm not sure how best to deal with this, because I know there's a lot of items, and I'm happy to just run through the presentation, and we can go through them one by one at the end, or if you want to ask me questions as we go along, I'm not sure what your usual.
So I would suggest
Oh,
that,
Mayor,
sorry, I would suggest that if we have questions, could we just stop? And so this was the first one about the bylaw, delegation and LUP bylaws, and now it's the zoning that you're gonna go, so you're gonna go, and there's 5 of these total, so you're just gonna go through them all and one by
Well,
one?
there is 5 different presentations.
Yes.
But within each presentation, there's a series of questions that
Sure.
you might want to ask questions on, or you might want to deal with them as they come up, or we just wait to the end of each presentation. Because with this slide here, I'm transitioning now into the next part of the land use procedures / delegation. I wasn't sure if council might have any questions about what's being proposed in relation to moving the delegation for DPs from one bylaw to the other, or that's.
If it's okay with you, if anybody does have a question, maybe we could just stop you and ask the question at that time.
Okay.
Is that okay? Everybody okay so far? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so before I transition to the next part of the land use procedures bylaw and development permits, I would just add that it's on the other thing we picked up on when we noticed the issue with the delegation for DPs is that the list of delegated DPs seems to be out of date, so we also want to update that. And we also feel there's a benefit to not maintaining the delegation of land use procedures bylaw, because the delegation bylaw is the newer bylaw of council. And it sets out a 30-day reconsideration period as opposed to 60. It's got more detail, it's just more current. It seems to be the preferred location for the delegation to reside. So that does basically inform our recommendation on that one. Now, of course, once you get in, and I've said this to our board many times, once you get into these bylaws and start looking at things, there's always invariably a cascading effect that happens. And so, we're looking at the land use procedures bylaw for development permits. We're looking at the delegation, but then other things start catching our attention in relation to development permits. So that's what the remainder of the slides now we'll be dealing with are some of the issues that we picked up on that we thought, council might want to provide direction on in order to improve processes, clear up some issues around validity of some of the requirements, et cetera. So the first one that I'll touch on is site notification. And as council is aware, for development permits, or sorry, for development variance permits and for rezonings, there's statutory requirements for notifications. There is no statutory requirement for development permits. When you as a council or staff with delegated authority are looking at DP, really compliance is based on the guidelines that are existing within your official community plan. It's not really meant to be a public consultation process, and there's really not an opportunity for staff or you as a council considering these to take into consideration public comment. The public comment component occurs when the development permit is being created in the first place, including to your official community plan. But once it's in your official community plan, it's more akin to a building permit. A building permit complies with the building code, it gets issued. A DP complies with the guidelines in your OCP, it gets issued. So putting up a site notice, well, I get the transparency part of it. It does prove problematic, and it appears to be encouraging the submission of comments that we really can't respond to or deal with, which I suspect would then lead to frustrations from putting them in. So we're proposing in relation to that the requirement for a site notice on site be deleted as a requirement in procedures bylaw. Yeah, I kind of already touched on this slide here. I just put the graphic up. I know it's hard to see the headline, but it's just an example where a municipality, for various reasons, tried to refuse development permits for reasons unrelated to their guidelines, and of course that ended up of course found against the municipality. Really, the point I'm trying to make here is that you really, whether it's staff or council, need to focus on the guidelines, let the proposal apply, and that should be the end of it. So issuance in terms of development permits is the next thing, and there's some very detailed requirements currently within the land use procedures bylaw that we feel could probably be simplified and removed. And so the bylaw at the moment sets out that adoption of the zoning amendment, where there's development taking place, shall only occur following the issuance of the DP. There's requirements that for a rezoning application, it needs to proceed to a certain step, which is third reading. after which the applicants then required to put in the DP within 6 months. And that would have to be approved, issued DP before the amendment bylaw can be adopted. It's really complicated. It does raise concerns about the introduction of new information because, of course, after the reading is usually after you've had a public hearing on the amendment bylaw. And as council's aware, after the public hearing closes, you can consider new information. Yet, with this provision, you seem to be inviting the submission of new information in the form of this forming character DP, which hasn't really been seen or considered up until this point, post public hearing. So that's a concern. The other provision we picked up on was that a DP will only remain valid if the building permit's issued. Not that that's invalid, it's probably just undesirable. The two shouldn't be linked in that way. And I guess the point I would make to council is that the way the DP and building permit interact is that usually the DP is issued first, and the building permit has to be consistent with the DP. So there's no need to formally tie them together. They're already informally connected in that way. There can never be a building permit issue inconsistent with the DP. You don't need to tie them together. And if a building permit expires, there's no need for a DP to expire because any building permit reapplication, renewal, resubmission will still have to be consistent with that existing DP. By having them expire together, you're essentially creating more work, not just for the building department, but also for the planning department, because now building's dealing with a new DP and planning station dealing with a new development permit. And so our preference would be to deconnect them in that way and just trust that a building permit will be consistent with the DP and they have one expiry dates. We can just administer the staff levels. So issuance and term. And again, I think this touches on a lot of the stuff that I just had in the last slide, but again, just to simplify it, we think a lot of the existing provisions in the land use bylaw, land use procedure bylaw can be deleted, and this will create efficiencies in how we process rezonings, building permits, subdivisions, and DPs. So I apologize, I think I jumped ahead and touched on most of the things. So moving on now to the next thing that we picked up on in conditions. And so the land use procedures bylaw seems to be containing very specific language related to how DPs may be used by the town in relation to other approvals that are required. So in relation to infrastructure or density bonusing or any other conditions that council might put into a zoning amendment or DVP, it's suggesting that possibly a development permit will be used to leverage or guarantee that those amenities, provisions, infrastructure upgrades, whatever can be acquired. Permit can't be used that way. If you've issued an approval under a separate process, whether it's subdivision approval or zoning or DVP, and the developer is not complying with the conditions of that approval, you need to enforce through that other approval. Getting back to what I said at the beginning of the presentation, because you've adopted the zoning and OCP bylaw, you have to have procedures in place for people to apply to you for an amendment or a permit. You can't hold up one application on the basis of compliance with a separate approval. I would encourage council to consider going through enforcement of that other approval if there's an issue and deal with the development permit on its own merits. So simplify the bylaw that way by removing language that suggests the DB can be used in relation to other approvals and their conditions. Yeah, maybe not the right time to have on the slide. So I want to say the other point we noticed too, and switching gears again here now, there's very specific language that council approval is required for transferring a development permit to a property owner in order for it to remain valid. So we do have concerns that that's an invalid requirement. And again, whether it's council considering a development permit or staff considering a development permit, it needs to be based on the guidelines. It needs to be based on the merits of that proposal vis-a-vis the guidelines, not who's making the application. Who's making the application should be immaterial to anybody's consideration. Yet this seems to be suggesting that council will consider the person as opposed to the proposal. And so we're recommending that that really needs to get out of the bylaw. The permit runs with the land, and if the land is sold, whoever buys the land is responsible for that permit and the conditions that may be associated with it. But council really shouldn't be getting into determining whether that person is still entitled to that approval. So pre-application meetings, this is another one that caught our attention. So I just want to read some of this out, just so council understand where we're coming from here. So the bylaw currently says that the objective of the service is to achieve win-win gains by promoting projects from the outset that best fit with town development objectives and priorities, while saving time and cost for the developer and staff. in the actual application process. That's great. I mean, there's no issues with that. At staff's discretion, they may consult with council on the developer's proposal at committee and then communicate the preferences to the developer. So of concern in relation to this is that the pre-application meetings are basically encouraging potentially complicated negotiations prior to even formal application coming in. Obviously, from our perspective, before any application fees have been paid. And that can take a lot of staff time, especially if somebody's maybe not seriously putting an application and they're simply testing the waters to see what kind of response they get and what kind of conditions they may be looking at. And so to avoid staff getting bogged down in that, I think the purpose would be to remove this as a formal requirement. Obviously, staff are always available to talk with people who are interested in proposals, but not to get into really complicated negotiations that really should be coming potentially down the road. Maybe even after council's already seen the proposal and has requests that it wants to be have occurred as part of the application. The other point that we're concerned about too is that the language in the bylaw currently says that there's win-win gains to be realized by negotiating with administration, and that those are the negotiations are happening even before council consideration. Staff are really concerned about what that's saying, because of course, thinking about what brings somebody into the village to apply for an application, what it is that they want to do is inconsistent with your bylaws, otherwise we wouldn't be seeing them, right? So they're already starting off in a position where what they want to do isn't supported by the bylaws, but this is suggesting that somehow staff will be able to negotiate a win-win with them on something that's not supported by council's existing policy. So that's a major positive concern. And then it also suggests that, you know, council may be considering some of these proposals in committee. And again, I don't know if this has been past practice or not, but the bylaw seems to suggest that that might be happening without the applicant present. And I think as council probably aware from open meeting requirements that whenever you're discussing anything in relation to somebody's property, they always have the ability to attend. Probably should be invited to attend and be part of that discussion about what's happening with the property. So again, just a problematic element in the bylaw that we think needs to come out. So we're recommending that whole section of pre-application be deleted. Application form. So this is admittedly an administrative issue, but at the moment, the application forms themselves are embedded as a schedule to the bylaw. So anytime a change has to happen or has happened in relation to a separate bylaw that needs to be reflected in the application form, staff can't amend it unless they come to you to formally amend the language procedures bylaw. So it's not really a flexible or efficient approach to changing what's just basically an application form that should have discretion. So we're proposing that the existing schedules to the bylaw be deleted, and that a new provision be inserted, basically giving the CAO the ability to set the form of how these application forms will look. So it just allows for quicker and easier update. And finally, application fees. So there is a proposal to replace the existing application fees schedule. And again, so there is language in the Local Government Act that we have to follow setting application fees. And the fees are supposed to be a typical fee. So when council is setting or the town is setting, it has to be based on your estimated average costs for a typical rezoning or a typical development variance, but not the outlier, not the one that might take a ridiculous amount of staff time and legal costs and other expenses. That's not really reflective of your average. So keeping that in mind, I don't have it in a slide here, but I believe it was just attachment to the report. There's a new schedule B to the fees bylaw which sets out fees. So I just wanted to highlight that in some instances, you know, there are some substantial increases to the fees. So the zoning bylaw amendment is one of them. The current fee is set at $1,000, but as council is probably aware, you know, newspaper costs for advertising fees these days have increased significantly. I would argue in the last 5 or 6 years, and we certainly saw this at the regional district, where we have been paying $250 to $300 for newspaper fees, something that was in the range of $800 to $900 to advertise. And so the concern here is that newspaper fees themselves are almost exceeding the value or the cost of an application for the zone. So I don't know if it's happened yet, but I suspect the town's probably getting pretty close to actually taking a loss on rezoning applications just in relation to newspaper fees. So we're recommending that those fees be increased to $3,000, and that generally covers staff time, admin time, notification costs, venue bookings, anything else related to rezoning. In the other instance, there's some reduction in fees being proposed. And again, this gets back to the typical cost that's incurred by the town. So at the moment, there's an entry for what's called a major development permit. The bylaw called or suggested major development is one that's over $1 million in costs. The council or the town's fees for that are $1,250 per $1 million in value. So you can imagine if a $10 million project comes in, the town's going to be charging $12,000 for a development permit, which is not the typical cost to process that type of an application. So there's concern there that fee may not be consistent with the requirements of the act. So I think we're standardized it for development permits, so it's no longer a major and minor. I think it's around 650 or somewhere in that one that got their images. But anyways, it's just more reflective of the typical cost to process a form of character DP.
Chris, can I just stop
Sure.
you? And Councillor Chong has a question, I think.
Thank you. Outlined by like the local government act, how is an average cost calculated? Is it regionally or is it provincial average cost?
It would be through the town's experience. So it's basically, based on your processing requirements for that, the public information requirements, whether it's newspaper meetings, rezoning, public hearings, etc. You basically look at all your costs and average it out. I believe that was formally done here in order to inform the fee schedule.
Thank you.
Go ahead, thank you.
Great, thank you. So basically with the fee structure, I think the guiding principle is to try to simplify the fee structure. There's also some new ones added that weren't within the existing one as well. So I believe that the new Ocean community plan, the ability for council to issue temporary use permits was introduced, but there's no fee currently. So theoretically, somebody coming in today would get a freebie on that. But with the proposed amendments, we'd be introducing a fee of $1,000. And then also floodplain exemptions are under consideration. I believe that's existing currently, so we're proposing to add a fee to that of $500. And then I just wanted to add that there were some fees not being addressed in the schedule. So ALR exclusion fee. There's a question on the legal authority to require that fee. A lot of local governments haven't required it. Others have proposed the fee in a different way, unrelated to say exclusion. It's more as a consultation fee, but anyway, the draft doesn't have at the moment. And then I also know there's a siting permit fee for RVs that's currently set at $90. One of the subsequent discussion papers will be asking for some council direction on RVs, campgrounds, and how we want to deal with that. So at the moment, the draft doesn't have that, but certainly something to be revisited on what council directs in relation to campgrounds here for discussion papers today. So that's it from my presentation on the land use bylaw, development permits, delegation, etc. Any more questions? I'm happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Garish. We know that you've been doing this for some time and you understand it really well. The recommendation that has been provided on this issue, delegation and LUP bylaw updates, is that the land use procedures amendment bylaw number 1235.07 and the delegation of authority amendment bylaw number 1292.02 be initiated. And so that would look at the all of the suggestions that you have, the recommendations that you have. Council? Yes.
Thank you. I just have one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
There was one slide with DPs regarding infrastructure servicing, and we want to separate the requirements. Now, what if there is, let's say, a parcel of land, but we know that infrastructure servicing would be a challenge? Would we recoup those costs through developer costs and charges for infrastructure servicing, or? Because my concern is that there is a parcel that, let's say, a developer wants to build something, but it would be at a huge cost to the town in terms of bringing that infrastructure to that parcel. Wouldn't the infrastructure ability also determine the land use? If that makes sense.
Well, it does. I guess the point I'm trying to make with the development permit is that the council has other avenues in which to secure these fees. And so usually for infrastructure, it's going to be through your subdivision servicing and development bylaw. And that bylaw is triggered either obviously by a subdivision application or depending on the use by building permit application. And, so there's ability to require those upgrades as part of that bylaw. You know, if there's, say, a rezoning component to it and council chooses to impose requirements for infrastructure upgrades in relation to rezoning. The point I was trying to make is that you need to pursue those if it's not happening through the conditions of approval for the rezoning. It's very challenging to come back with a development permit that might be related to environmental protection or the form and character of the building and try to use that as a way to leverage obligations that were considered through a separate approval process, right? So
To clarify, we're basically kind of clarifying the algorithm to make sure that we're allowing land use for these kind of stipulations as opposed to having a lot of crossover, because I have a sense that we have all these requirements that kind of makes the water a little muddy.
well, it's potentially trying to keep council out of a difficult situation where it might think it can use a development permit to ensure compliance with a separate approval, and it really can't. It needs to enforce that separate, the conditions of that separate approval. Assuming, of course, this is worst case scenario, that the developer is not complying with that other approval condition. Right? So there are mechanisms in which to do that. It's just not, the development permit is not potentially the way. The only exception to be for that would be, and I'm not sure if this is the case, if your development permit has somehow included specific guidelines in relation to provision of infrastructure, in which case then that could be included. But from what I've seen, at least on cursory review of your DPs, is they haven't got down into that level of detail, specifically in relation to infrastructure upgrades.
Thank you.
All right, so council, we have a recommendation in front of us, so I understand. Councillor King,
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll move option one.
okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Chung, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. That's just that these two delegation and land use be initiated. We look at them again, so thank you very much, carried. Now, Mr. Garish, we're going to look at residential densities and zoning bylaw review, Bill 44, which has been talked about, so. But yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess the option, there's an option, no, I'll pass. I'm reading right down the rest. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, so, go on to the next one, thank you.
Okay, great. And I'll prematurely apologize here because I think this presentation and the next one, the third one, there's a lot of overlap. We're dealing with issues that have been raised in relation to the local amendments that resulted from Bill 44. And there was too much information for one report, so that's why I ended up with 3 reports, but there is obviously overlap. And I'm going to try my best to explain the issues in each presentation, but there may be gaps or there may be duplications, so I just wanted to flag that as I started. So again, some background context for council's benefit. So I mean, not a lot of surprise here because there was a lot of media coverage of this last fall. High priority for provincial government, tackling housing crisis and enabling local governments to help with that by making significant, some would even say generational type change to the Local Government Act that we haven't seen in a long time to facilitate that. So they have done a number of things with Bill 44, and these are just some really quick highlights, obviously. You know, introduced for local government's new housing needs report requirements, mandated. So basically the provincial government rewrote your zoning bylaw for you by mandating specific densities in residential zones. They have mandated that your Michigan community plan is going to have to be updated more frequently, basically a 5-year cycle now based on also the housing needs report requirements. Something for next year in 2025, council is going to have to pre-zone land to accommodate a 20-year housing supply. And also, as council is aware, there's been changes to public hearing requirements, and the province has wiped out your ability to have a public hearing for certain residential proposals that comply with the community plan. So, in terms of organizing the information and how best to present it to you today, I mean, I did struggle with this part of it because there is a lot of information contained within Bill 44. But what I chose to do was highlight on some of the deadlines, because it's those deadlines that we're working towards that are informing some of these questions that we're putting to you. So as you can see here, the first one that we're working towards is the June 30th deadline. And, that's when the province has mandated that your zoning bylaw has to be updated to comply with what it's calling its new small scale multi-unit housing requirements in the Local Government Act. The next deadline after that, which I won't be touching on today per se, is the requirement to have an updated housing needs report done by the end of the year. And then, as I just indicated in the last slide, the next most important deadline after that will be end of 2025, when the 20-year supply of zone has to be built into gross beams of bylaws. So focusing on small scale multi-unit housing, and again, recognizing there's two more presentations after this one to deal with some of these same aspects. This particular presentation is focused on the efficient community plan amendments that are going to be required. And again, I put this up because I suspected a lot of people might be familiar with some of the headlines that were in the news. And so this is really what we're dealing with now, is this requirement for the number of units that have to be allowed in residential zones. And I think the last one, bottom right, is probably the best headline for this. I mean, end of the line is single family neighborhoods. So no more will there be just zoning for single detached. It's going to be up to, for some municipalities, 6 units, depending on proximity to bus lines that have certain service levels. But for most other places, and including the soils, it's going to be 3 to 4 units per parcel. So in order to do that, the province has introduced this concept of a restricted zone, quote unquote, into the Local Government Act. And so what the province considers a restricted zone to be is one in which local government is only allowed the following. So single family dwelling, duplex dwellings, suites, or accessory dwellings. And these are just some screenshots from the town's existing zoning bylaw. So not a surprise, because I think this applies probably to most local governments in the province. The zoning bylaw has a lot of instances where town has what the province now considers a restricted zone. So I tried to highlight here, you know, how that works. Where we have the R1 zone, the R2, and the RSS, and each of those zones is only allowed for one single family dwelling. So they're now restricted zones. So if the local government has a restricted zone, it must by June of this year use its zoning powers to one of the following. So allow 2 dwellings per parcel, or allow 3 to 4 per parcel. I mentioned 6. So use. I'll get into more specifics later, but so at the moment, you know, keeping that in mind, that we have to allow this type of density. The first thing we did is look at the town's efficient community plan to see, you know, how does it relate to this legislative requirement. And so as council may be aware, there's basically 2 categories or land use designations for residential, the low to medium density residential designation, and the medium to high density residential designation. So the low to medium, the LMR, currently permits densities of no more than 35 units per hectare, and that's in the form of single detached townhouses, triplexes, fourplexes, and accessory dwellings. I'm going to say that this is a very low density per hectare. I think generally as a rule of thumb, if you allow duplexes in the zone, you're looking at probably having to allow 45 units per hectare in order to accommodate, you know, duplexes on, again, assuming it's perfect site efficiency, a 1 hectare parcel. In relation to the medium to high density residential, it permits no more than 75 units per hectare, and this is in form of what the OCP calls flex development, so 3 plexes, 4 plexes, 5 plexes, stacked townhouses. I'm not sure what stacked is referring to. Usually townhouses are side by side, and apartments are stacked. But this is referring to stacked townhouses, and then low rise to mid rise apartments, but it specifies 4 stories in height. Again, this is the level of development in terms of density of units per hectare. That's generally a medium density. It's not really a high. Touching that in a second here. But the OCP also has other policies that speak to comprehensive development. Doesn't specify maximum density for the CD zones that council has previously approved, but certainly council has approved instances where a CD zone has allowed more than 75 units per hectare. I think there's an example of up to 99 units per hectare. And certainly heights greater than 4 stories. And I think there's a CD zone that I quoted in the report that has a allowance. So, you know, potentially fairly substantial development. OCP also makes reference to predefined areas for CD developments, but it's not quite clear where those are. And then also just a little bit more background context here. I think it's not more from my own benefit, trying to understand where the OCP was coming from on density allowances, but the town center renewal plan did speak to increasing densities in the town center area, obviously. But again, it's only up to 4 stories in height for apartment buildings. So I'm assuming that was tied back to the 35 to 75 units per hectare that the OCP speaks to. So keeping that in mind, so that's what your current OCP sets out, but now we have what the local government sets out, the local government act sets out. So now we have to accommodate 4 dwelling units in parcels greater than 280 square meters, which is very small parcel size. For parcels less than 280 square meters, it's 3 units per parcel. And the only situations in which council would only have to allow 2 units per parcel is properties that aren't serviced by community water and sewer. And again, we just did a really quick review of parcels within the municipality, and I think the only ones that we could identify that might fall into the 2 parcel were the ones that are recently incorporated or consolidated within the town boundary, from electoral area A, kind of northwest side of the municipality, up towards the lake. So, in order to accommodate the new statutory requirements, it's being proposed that the LMR designation be replaced with a new low density designation, and that the MHR designation be replaced with a new medium density designation. And it's being proposed that policy for the low density be as follows: that basically council supports the use of these lands to a maximum of 4 parcels. 4 parcels on a 280 square meter lot. I think the density that we calculated that out, again, assuming perfect site efficiency, would be about 140 units per hectare. So we don't want to put 140 units per hectare in as the density provision for the low density designation. So that's why we're tying it to total units instead. So slightly different than the OCP currently has, which again is the 35 units per hectare. For the medium density, is being proposed that the range of housing types be simplified so that the policy simply speaks to supporting townhouses and apartment buildings. That we don't get into references to stacked or plexes or low rise, and that the density for the medium be the existing 75 units per hectare. But as council can see, that any references to high density be dropped. This is just a foreshadowing what has to happen next, but you know, in relation to whether council wants a high density residential zone, I suspect that's a conversation we'll be having next year. When we start looking at trying to meet this 20-year projected growth demand in the OCP zoning bylaw, we won't really have a good idea of what has to happen until the housing needs report is done by the end of this year. And then we can start getting into pre-zoning. The other thing I want to flag for council too, we might put forward changes related to this, is that the OCP, and again, I even noticed this in the town center revitalization plan, a lot of references to density bonusing. Province is basically wiping that out. When you have to do your 20-year projected growth demand, that cannot be premised on any density bonusing. And again, my understanding is that the province trying to streamline residential approvals of the housing crisis, stopping public hearings part and parcel of that. That seemed to be a delay. Density bonusing and negotiating around that zoning seemed to be a delay. And basically, if you have to pre-zone 20 years of growth, that almost essentially removes your ability to acquire that density bonusing, because the thinking is that people won't have to zone. You'll have pre-zone, they can come in, they can do the development. So how we deal with the existing policies around density bonusing, again, probably a discussion next year, but something to consider. Having said all that, what the province is encouraging local governments to do, and of course the town is in the middle of this right now, is look at your user rates and also your DCCs. The density bonusing is on the table. They're saying you need to focus on how you pay for this upfront. So get your DCCs updated, update your user rates, which I was a discussion here, and try to move away from the bonus. Yeah, so I've already just touched on this. So this takes us to the recommendation. So basically replacing the 2 existing designations with a simplified low density and medium density designation, updated policies to reflect that. And then I think, unlike the previous discussion, we don't have draft amendment bylaws prepared at this point. We're seeking direction from council on that, but depending on what he tells us today, we'll go back, draft some amendments to the OCP and bring that back to committee review. You can see that it comes up or it comes down. So that's the motion or the recommendation at this point.
Okay, thank you. I just had one question. I'm wondering if the government has taken into consideration the fire department ability to handle some of the higher density buildings that they're putting in, certainly height restrictions. at this point, we do not have the ability
Mhm.
to deal with all of those. Did that come up at all, or is that, a totally different issue?
Well, my understanding is coming indirectly.
Okay.
And that's related to some of the other changes that they've done, not necessarily related to planning. But there were other legislative changes, that say, for instance, introduce this new concept of the amenity cost charge. Which would be a whole new bylaw, very similar to development cost charge bylaws. But the range of issues that you can raise money for and spend on is expanded beyond DCCs. And I believe emergency services, fire services is something that you can collect an ACC for and use those funds to, I'm assuming theoretically,
Bit more.
buy new infrastructure, new equipment to deal with higher density developments. So that's how the province is encouraging work governments to deal with this. Don't try to density bonus it. Adopt these new bylaws, start charging for it, be great the chance that way.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question on this? Okay, so we have a recommendation here, and I'm wondering how council feels about this one.
Option one.
Thank you. Second it. So that would be the recommended motion that, that the low to medium density and medium to high density designation be replaced with low density and medium density. And will be brought back to committee of the whole. I'll call the question, all in favor. Thank you very much, Mr. Garish. So we're going to go on to development permit area designations. Another one from Bill 44, which seems to be sort of changing as we speak, isn't it? Because they find things that they need to come up and adjust. Okay, go ahead, thank you.
Okay. So development permits, this I'll admit to you, this was a challenging presentation to put together. It's gonna look slightly different in terms of its layouts and presentation materials to the report, but all the same information is within the two. So again, I apologize, I mean, this is just some of the background context that overlaps between all these discussions, because of course they're all tied to the same legislative amendments. Let's skip over the important timelines, but it's all tied together. So this is a different part of what Bill 44 changed in the Local Government Act, and you know, apart from all the density issues, which we'll talk about in subsequent presentation, there was provision that was put in relation to guidelines that the minister might issue in order to help local governments when they're redrafting their bylaws to comply with this new small-scale multifamily housing. And this guideline, which is the image at right, was published on December 7th. And it contains a lot of information that I believe was included as an attachment to one of the reports today. And so this presentation is focusing on what it has to say about development permits. And you know, basically what the province is encouraging both governments to do is to create a favorable regulatory environment for new building forms in areas that have traditionally been reserved for single-family and duplex homes. So not only has the province rewritten your zoning bylaw to allow 3 to 4 units per parcel, it's also encouraging you when you update to reflect that, to look at how you have been regulating those historically. Is that approach still appropriate? And could you maybe look at a more flexible approach? So what I'll be presenting here deals with that in the context of development permits. I don't know if I've got a slide on development permits, but there's a section of the Act that allows council to establish lands within a municipality as being subject to development permit area designation. Those designations can be related to the protection of something, whether it's a natural environment. It can be related to the form and character of buildings, whether it's residential, multifamily, commercial, industrial, and then there's also conservation provisions related to greenhouse gas, water conservation, and energy conservation. So council does have a number of those bylaws. What the policy manual is saying in relation to those bylaws is that you know, are what you're trying to do with them appropriate for development permit, or is there other ways that you can regulate that might be better, or should you even look at whether that regulation is suitable because it may be adversely impacting the development of multi-unit housing. And so I'll start with the form and character. And so what the policy manual is saying in relation to these is form and character is the aesthetics of the building, right? So how does the building look? And it's saying of all of the DPAs allowed by local government, those, for the purpose of managing form and character, have the greatest potential to negatively impact the creation of your housing units. And these form and character DPs can introduce significant time, cost, and other delays and uncertainty to projects, and they can also easily undermine the reliability of projects. So really reconsider your historical approaches to these. And the province is saying performing character, local governments only in exceptional circumstances should you be applying these to 6 units or less. So really important. And also look at your DPs, because again, we certainly see these in the regional district. A lot of them have been structured in a way that prioritizes the interests of existing developments, so existing single detached neighborhoods, and trying to make new multifamily developments fit within those existing single detached neighborhoods. Problems seen as totally wrong. That's the backwards way of doing it. If anything, you should be prioritizing the multi-units and not worrying about the single detached impacts. So they have other guidelines as well. We should consider, being a little bit more flexible in terms of access to these units. Don't go over the top with landscaping requirements, because really when you look at the form of multi-unit housing, there's not much landscaping left. Certainly in comparison to what you might see in a single detached neighborhood, you don't require landscaping plans. So, is that really that important? And, a lot of local governments will try to use their DPs to manage bulk mass and form of these in relation to height, as an example. Maybe that's better addressed through zoning, so that maybe they'll do it through DPs. Which brings us to Southeast Meadowlark. So again, just some background context here. So as council is likely aware, it's the area shown at the image at right that's been shaded, I guess kind of a burnt orange color. There's a number of different zones within that, although I get that there's a long-term plan for Southeast Meadowlark, but the current zones are the IRD, R1, PI, P1, and AG. That said, again, just from what I can see, it appears that Southeast Meadowlark have generally been developed single detached, even though the zoning allows for a multiple range of different zones, which is what Bill 44 is looking for. The existing DP also speaks to trying to minimize the impact of the development of this area on adjacent farmland. And it also includes references to promoting energy and water conservation, greenhouse gas reduction. So pretty typical forming character DP. So as I just indicated, it looks like the existing development of Meadowlark has been formed in single detached dwellings, so one parcel. Seems unlikely, although I suppose to be determined, but it seems unlikely that there could be more than 6 units per parcel at Southeast Meadowlark. We feel at the staff level, the BC Step Code provides a better venue for which to address sustainability concerns, that the Southeast Meadowlark DP shouldn't be getting into that. And if there is a desire to regulate multifamily development at Southeast Meadowlark in the future, rather than have 2 competing or different DPs, we feel there's a benefit to maybe repealing Southeast Meadowlark. And if you want to govern form and character, we can use a multifamily DP for that, especially if it's going to be revised as part of all these Bill 44 considerations. And so I just picked this up a promotional video. So I mean, when I say it appears that Southeast Meadowlark developed a single detached dwellings, this is what informed my understanding of that area. So I take it these are largely standalone individual homes on one parcel. So given that, and given the provincial direction that we really shouldn't be applying form and character to less than 6 units, and it looks like Southeast Meadowlark is going to be developed generally with less than 6 units per parcel, it's probably not a benefit to maintain this DP going forward. So the way I structured the options here, so the option 1 is the staff recommendation. So we're recommending the Southeast Meadowlark be appealed. Council is not supportive of that. There are other options that we considered, one of which would be to retain Southeast Meadowlark, but to amend it. So look at repealing all the guidelines that might negatively impact new housing developments, and also it's a trigger that it only apply to 7-year units or more. We don't know how that's ever triggered, but Southeast Meadowlark, that's an option certainly for you. And the other option would be to replace Southeast Meadowlark with the multifamily DP area. And the final one would be status quo, where the DP just stays as it is unchanged.
Can I ask, I know that the the area, the second development, at the Southeast Meadowlark, because the first one has been completed. I think that there are several different options in there. Not just single family, but I think there are some duplexes included as well.
Yeah.
Is that sort of the right way to approach it? And in other words, we need to see more of those in the planning, which is why we take out. Because we obviously changed it from single family standalone
Mhm.
to allowing duplexes in there for sure.
Yeah, well, and I'll be touching on this in a subsequent slide, because
Okay.
the zoning that applies to Southeast Meadowlark is gonna have to change as well. And, we're recommending that it get rolled into a new, small scale multi-unit housing bill. It will allow for single attached duplexes, triplexes, and up to 40 unit apartment buildings. I guess the question before you right now, though, is to what extent do you want to regulate how those buildings look? And given the provincial direction, if we're only looking at potentially 3, 4, maybe 5 units per parcel at Southeast Meadowlark, the province is saying not less than 6 for a DP, and then there's probably no benefit to having a DP on Southeast Meadowlark. But, you know, as I was indicating, there's certainly options for council in relation to that, in terms of replacing it with multi-family DP, or keeping it as is, but amending it. We just built staff a little bit, how it's developed at this point, what's anticipated in the future, plus the initial directions, it's probably beneficial just to repeal it itself.
So it's interesting because when this was first developed some years ago, that was the whole idea. Let's make smaller lots and smaller homes and we even have an affordable, part in that as well. So I think we were kind of on the right track. We're just having to do more.
Well, certainly, I would say we're very much on the right
Yes.
track. It's just in relation to development permit areas, the province is saying, you know,
Yeah.
that this could be an impediment.
Sure.
Please don't apply to less than 7 units.
Okay.
On parcels.
Okay. Anybody else have any? No? So we're looking at did you have something more? on
Well,
this
there's more in this one, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
First DP.
Go ahead.
Try to pick up
Yeah.
time of it. So the Hillside DP, so this is out of order from your report today. I put it up there because it's the other, sorry, I put it in the presentation. It's the next one to discuss because it's the next one that staff are recommending be repealed. So again, I have to apologize for my unfamiliarity. I don't believe this was within previous official community plan. It might have been introduced with the new OCP a couple of years ago. But as you can see here, shown on right is the lands within the municipality to which it applies. So whether you see this in the subsequent slide, there's a lot of lands outside of the municipality that the map schedule appears to be suggesting are DP, but of course, the council can't designate those areas as DP. But within the town, interestingly, we just did some really quick calculations. I think it was 66 or 67% of the lands designated as hillside are either crown land or town owned. So a minority, 1/3 or privately held lands. And it's a really, I would argue, complex DP in that, the name hillside suggests that it's been implemented in relation to the protection of development and hazardous conditions. But when you start reading the guidelines, it's actually also interested in energy and water conservation, greenhouse gas reduction, the informing character and intensive residential development, as well as environmental protection. So it's biting off a lot. And that makes it difficult to administer. It's unclear to staff what is the principal objective of DP. Is it actually hazardous conditions or some of these other ones? If it's these other ones, we don't really feel that it's appropriate for single attached neighborhoods, which is where the majority of the hillside DP appears to apply. We would also point out too that if it's from character, whether it's the existing multifamily, the council can use for that purpose. And council also has the existing riparian and environmental sensitive DP, so it doesn't need a hillside DP to protect environmental issues. So that can be dealt with in different ways. The other thing we noticed too is that for areas that have been designated as hillside, generally our understanding is it's steep slopes, hazardous areas, that there's no specific report prepared or generally considered to be above 30% grade. This particular DP has been applied to 15% higher. So it's captured potentially maybe lands that, wouldn't otherwise be considered as hazardous. And I've got an example of, I'll show you council in a second here. So again, thinking back to what I was just saying about Southeast Meadowlark, the province is encouraging local governments not to apply forming character to less than 6 units, then I think that calls into question a big part of the existing hillside DP. If the building code is being encouraged as the venue through which to deal with sustainability considerations, i.e. the sub code, I think that removes a lot of the considerations in hillside DP for energy, water, and GHG reductions. And then also, if we take a look at what's actually been designated as steep slope on private land, so which we did, I think it raises the question as to what are we actually trying to accomplish here. So the image at left is your existing map schedule. The image at right, we took out all lands not within the municipality. And we also took out all lands less than 30% slope. So you can see that the footprint of the DP area designation is reduced significantly. And we zoomed in a little bit closer to see, okay, well, what is it that we're trying to address here? What is the concern for hazardous conditions or otherwise? And so I admit this is a potentially egregious example, not that I cherry picked it on purpose, but it's the first one we looked at and it seemed to fit the bill. Underscoring to council some of the concerns that we have with the mapping for this DP. So this particular site on 74th has been deemed hillside development permit. So we're not sure if the main concern here is steep slopes, forming character, greenhouse gas reductions, or environmentally sensitive areas. We don't think there's anything environmentally sensitive here. We're struggling with the steep slope component. If it's forming character, well, this is a church, it wouldn't be capturing the multifamily anyway. And then if it's greenhouse gas, water, and energy conservation, we deal with that through step code. So what is this DP trying to do on this particular property? And it's steep slope, I hate to say it, but our understanding is that the mapping was based on LiDAR. Council's familiar with LiDAR. It's a sensor-based camera. We're wondering if it picked up the roof of the church as a steep slope, and that's why it's been designated as the slopes of some of the other properties. So it's a concern for us. Depending on what council wants to do, if there's a desire to retain this, I think we would go back to urban systems and ask for an explanation of what was the mapping based on, what kind of quality control checks were done. Were built form excluded from slope calculations, or is this inadvertently picked up roof grades as part of the considerations? Because we're struggling to understand what this DP is doing on 74th, right? But as you can see in the image to the bottom right, it's not the only property that's been highlighted as having something to do with hillside development. So anyway, long story short, we have a lot of concerns with this DP as implemented at the staff level. And, you know, given everything that it's trying to do, given the direction from province, given the concerns around mapping, we think it should be repealed. But sorry, before I get into that, I think redrafting it might not be a minor task, which is why we're recommending for repealing. But if council is concerned about steep slope development with the municipality, certain other options could be investigated. I mean, we can certainly have discussions with urban systems as to the basis for the mapping, and is there tweaks that can be made, but again, that might not be a minor job. And if it is repealed, if there's a concern about hillside development, certainly identifying or revisiting this as a strategic project in future is available to council and allow us to take a clean, fresh look at the issue. So again, similar to the last DP, staff recommendation is to repeal, certainly retaining it, but revising it is available to council as is status quo. No changes.
Yeah, it seems kind of crazy to me too. I think definitely that should be looked at again. That doesn't even make sense. We know the areas and I don't see where steep slope would fit into that at all. So, I'm thinking that carry on. I think that makes sense.
Okay, I'm gonna move. Just watching time. I'm gonna move on to multifamily. I'll try to keep on pace here a bit. So multifamily is again, it's a forming character one, so how does the building look? The current triggers are any development comprising 2 or more units, so somebody using duplex, triplex, fourplex for the building. It's going to have to get a multifamily DP. In addition to forming character, again, kind of common theme with a lot of the town's DPs. It's also seeking to promote energy and water conservation and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then you can see it, the map it right, because it applies to duplexes. It's been applied to a lot of lands that, you know, it's multifamily, generally multifamily is considered or associated with the RM1 zone, the multifamily zone. But it's also been applied to a lot of low density areas, and I suspect that's because of the 2 units or more trigger. So it's not, this particular one wasn't as problematic from our perspective as the Southeast Meadowlark one. I mean, there are aspects of it that don't, or aren't consistent with the direction being provided by the minister through the policy manual. I mean, there are some general references here to having new multifamily fit in with existing less intensive uses, which we understand to be references to single detached neighborhoods, which again is not something that we should have multifamily focusing on. There's other guidelines that kind of hit concerns raised in the policy manual. So, you know, the building massing should be considered uses on adjacent properties. Well, if we're talking about single detached, that's really problematic in the context of multifamily. Impacts of shadows, you know, be minimized again. So you're prioritizing the rights of existing development over new development, which again makes encouraging multifamily difficult. Block grading, views, etc. Sorry, I'm just going to skip over some of this stuff because of time. So this is just a generic example that I pulled up of a news site that was speaking about small scale multifamily housing. And I thought it would be beneficial to put up here because it just shows that with guidelines that are attempting to have multifamily fit within an existing single detached neighborhood, that can be really problematic. So you can see here on either side of this 4-unit development are 2 low slung single family homes. And if you're trying to get that multifamily to fit with those, you're basically ruling out, you know, 2 or 3 or 4-unit developments, right? You can also see here the reduced setbacks, which we'll touch on in the subsequent slides. Front, very small, and the whole landscaping issue. I mean, there's really not much land left after one of these units goes in for landscaping, especially in comparison to single detached. Either side of them, which have expansive yards and spaces for planting. So I thought this was a really powerful visual in terms of how it's very difficult for multi-unit to fit with an existing single detached, and we should be trying to fit within that existing development form. They really are their own separate new form, and we need to be trying to encourage that. So yeah, I've touched on that. So options for the multifamily. So we do feel that it can be tweaked. It doesn't need to be abandoned like Southeast Meadowlark. We strongly feel that it should only be applied to 7 units or more in line with the policy manual. And that council might also want to think about, we do like, if the direction is to provide, the direction is to have it only apply to 7 or more units. The footprint on the map schedule should be reduced to multifamily zones. We can certainly do that as part of the update. Other options would be, as with Southeast Meadowlark, to repeal multifamily in its entirety or the status quo that it won't change at all. And I think if we got direction on option 1, we would come back to so that the revised DP area of consideration.
I think that makes sense. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mixed use commercial, again, a lot of the same issues. I'm not going to touch on them again. I'll just jump straight to options. So very similar to multifamily, we think it can be tweaked. We can look at the guidelines that relate to housing, address those in relation to policy manual, bring it back to council for consideration and get direction at that point. But as with the other ones, obviously the option to repeal is available to you, as is the option for status quo. I think these might be the last 2. Protection of the environment. So we're not really proposing any changes here. Council is required under the Riparian Protection Act to have riparian protections in place. So there's really not much we can do with those. And environmentally sensitive, you know, generally applies to crown town land again. The only thing that we picked up on, which we're asking direction on, is that because the 2 DPs were put on the same schedule, we think there might have been a mistake made in relation to some of the ponds or smaller lakes. So you can see here on left, Peanut Pond is currently designated as environmentally sensitive. Our expectation is that it would have been riparian development permit. So again, depending on direction we get, we might go back to our systems and just ask some questions about what was the actual intent for these designations. We think there might be a mistake, but that the best way to deal with this going forward is to have them on separate map schedules so that you don't get that bleeding over the 2 layers. So again, the option, the revision, bring those back or status quo thing. I said for DP designations.
Well, that was a lot.
Yeah.
So we do have a recommendation here on 3 of the issues that you mentioned. The Southeast Meadowlark, policies and the multi-family mixed use and the map separating the, environmentally sensitive and riparian. So, council, what is your option here? Okay.
I move option 1.
Okay, that has all those 3 things in it. Okay, is there a seconder? Councilor Bennett. All in favor? Thank you very much. Okay, so next is the draft zoning bylaw legislative changes.
I'll figure it out, I'm just worried about time that
We're all day.
You know what, you go right ahead. I think you come down to deal with this and we're quite happy to have you go carry on, please.
No. Is this the right one? No.
I might not have changed the page, so you can just bring it up and hop in and
Okay.
start clicking through. Get to the development permit part. Okay, yeah, this should be. Gonna jump through all the slides that we were covered in this presentation. Okay, so this is where it becomes different. So the purpose of this presentation, so we've talked initially about changes to your OCP to reflect the policies that are required to support what the province is saying you now have to have zoning bylaw. The second presentation is on development permits, which are also in your OCP, and reflecting what needs to happen with those in order to comply with the small scale multi-unit housing. Now we're moving on to the zoning bylaw and what has to happen with your zones in order to accommodate some of these changes in the Local Government Act. And so I think in my initial OCP discussion, I mentioned that you know, there's some some localities where it's only 2 per parcel, and that's generally the electoral areas. We help Village Care and Mesa planning too. They only have to do 2 per parcel. Soyuz is different. You have to do 3 to 4 because obviously you exceed 5,000 population, but you're also a primary growth area under the South Okanagan growth strategy, which is a trigger under the Act now. And where you provide local government water and sewer is also a consideration in terms of density. So because you meet all those criteria, you have to provide 3 to 4 units per parcel. Again, this is just context. I think there's only those few parcels that were recently brought into the town that might have this apply to them, but where the requirement is only for 2 dwellings per parcel, the province is saying that can be in the form of 1 single detached, the suite, or 1 single detached and an accessory dwelling, or if you have sewer, water in place, you can do a duplex, which obviously has 2 units. And you know, I mentioned here that this is the form that will apply in the electoral area around you, but very few properties within town. There are situations where municipalities such as the Soy have to provide 3 to 4 per parcel. The province is again encouraging flexibility, which seems to be the underlying theme of Bill 44. And that the zoning should allow for that to be in form of apartment buildings, townhouses, it could be duplexes with an allowance for secondary suites within the duplex, which is basically just a apartment building or townhouse. It's just you can't stratify a secondary suite, whereas with units in a townhouse or apartment building you can. Or theoretically, you could allow for zoning that has a single detached house with a suite and an accessory dwelling on one parcel, so you get quite close to that 4 units. So yeah, determining if the parcel has to have 3 or 4. I already mentioned the RGS and infrastructure considerations. The other dividing line though between the 3 and 4 is the parcel size, 280 square meters. Less than that is 3, more than that is 4. Why the province chose 280 square meters, I don't know. But it is a very small parcel size. There's very few parcels that meet that. I know we did we haven't done it for Soyuz, but we did it in OK Falls. We did a assessment. I think there was only 1 historic parcel from the original 1909 survey plan that came in at less than 280 square meters. I don't know how many within town might meet that criteria. I suspect probably a little bit more, but it's not common. So yeah, so 3 to 4 units. We are assuming it's going to apply to almost all parcels within the town. The zones that are affected are your R1, R2, R3, RSS, R5, and of course, Southeast Meadowlark IRD zones. I've mentioned this a few times, the only exceptions might be the new parcels incorporated on 87th Street. There are exemptions. I don't think any of these exemptions would apply to the town though. So generally there would have to have been an existing hazard area where you have a long-standing prohibition on density increases and qualified professional reports supporting that. This exemption was not meant to be something that a local government could simply try to address by implementing a new DP or ripping off a new hazard assessment. That I think the province is looking for that long-term track record of regulating density. Again, just some more background context. So the 6 units doesn't apply to Soyuz. It's based on transit stops with frequency of service. I believe it's 15-minute intervals. The bus has to come by. I'm fairly certain it doesn't exist. Soyuz. The other change, local governments must not hold public hearings on zoning where the sole purpose is of complying with these requirements. So everything we've been talking about in relation to DPs and OCP policy changes and even these zoning changes, we can notify that these changes are happening, but it will not be a public hearing on them. The province doesn't want them getting bogged down in community input. And then interestingly, and again, I put this on here because I think it relates to Southeast Meadowlark, there is no exceptions provided for ALC conditions of approval. Which is interesting because we've seen this in the rural areas as well. So situations where the commission has tried to limit density on a parcel excluded for redevelopment next to the reserve, the small scale multifamily makes no accommodation for that. So I think Southeast Meadowlark, the commission said no more than 35 units per hectare. Well, if we're allowing 3 or 4 units per parcel, and that's 140 units per hectare, that's totally inconsistent with the Land Commission's decision. So when we circulate these to agencies, and if we get comments back from the commission on it, I suspect it's something we have to tell them to take up the province. Our hands will have to be tied on this. Okay, so I touched on this previously. I won't spend too much time, but so the guidelines were put up by the minister. We have to consider them when updating our zoning bylaw. So that's what these slides we're touching on. Again, just some quick background. So what we're proposing is that the existing 6 residential zones be consolidated down into a new single RS1 zone, which we're just tying back to the legislative language, which is small scale multi-unit residential housing. So we're proposing that there be flexibility in that zone. So moving away from those examples I had in the earlier slides where there was only one single detached dwelling allowed parcel, the proposed RS1 zone will allow for a range of housing types, up to 3 to 4 units in total. Apartment buildings, duplexes, and detached townhouses, also allowance for secondary suites and accessory dwellings in all zones. The important part that I would convey to council though is that the zone would cap that at 4 units per parcel is more than 280 square meters in area, or 3 if it's less. And for those newly consolidated parcels, we have a provision that's only 2 until they're brought onto the sewer and water system, which essentially is what this slide sets out. And again, the picture showing that, I just want to emphasize here, I put this in with the wording at the bottom for setbacks. You can see here, and this I think is going to be one of the biggest changes you're going to be asked to consider in relation to the zoning bylaw, is the front setback requirements versus what historically has been applied in the town. So you can see here that, based on the zone, and I started to put it all into one zone, so it's a range, but current setbacks within the town range 3.5 to 6 meters for the front and 1.5 to 6 meters for the rear. The minister's guidance is recommending that in urban municipalities such as Soyuz, a 2-meter front setback be considered, just so that developments like this, there's more flexibility in terms of building envelope that they have to work with. Yes, it's going to put them closer to the street, and yes, it's going to be significantly different from, as you can see here, the single detached dwellings that have been developed decades ago beside them. That this is the direction. So I can't emphasize enough what a significant change this is going to be from their existing development patterns.
It certainly makes a difference to parking requirements too, doesn't it? Because you're taking away a lot of the land. So I know that I read that somewhere too, that parking requirements has been.
So I won't spend too much time on this. It's just in relation to accessory dwellings. I mean, there's not really substantial change here other than the rear setback. It's on 3 over here. The only one that I wasn't sure of when we construct, I mean, there's many different ways to structure it, but the current zoning bylaw just has a blanket prohibition. So it's not tied to a specific setback measurement, it's tied to where you built your existing house. So if your existing house is 10 meters back, the bylaw is saying nothing between the house and the front parcel line. Now we can change that, we can say, well, no, the standard setback is 2 meters. But that might result, depending on where the house is, or the main structure, the accessory structure being placed between it and the front street. So we're recommending a 2 meter setback to correspond with what we're recommending for the principal dwelling unit, but that would be very different from current zoning regulation. So this for council's consideration. I'll keep moving here. Oh, sorry, the other thing I want to qualify too is that the images that I'm using here are just a random Google image. So they're not purpose built for this presentation. So they may not always work entirely with what I'm presenting, but they conveyed some basic information that I wanted to bring to council. So then these are two typical examples where it's not quite what I'm talking about, but it shows, especially the principal dwelling, it shows the difference that's going to occur from the increase in height. So your current zoning bylaw, again, it's a range of maximum building height based on zone, and it goes from 6 to 9 meters. Province is recommending 11 meters. So this image is showing a typical 10-meter height allowance, which you'll find in most residential zones. The house isn't quite that high. Going to 11 meters for a 10-meter zone would be an increase of about 3 feet 4 inches. So again, it's going to be a change for soils. The province is also recommending that, because you now basically have to allow accessory dwellings, in order to make accessory dwellings more viable, and this is the flexibility part, don't tie them to the existing height restrictions for your a garage or a workshop or a shed. Give them a little bit more space to work with, and they're recommending 8 meters. So that's what we're not specifically referenced in the policy manual, but again, it's the cascading effect, right? So if we're looking at increasing maximum height in the low density residential zones to 11 meters, well, council's current medium density zone only goes to 10 meters. So we would not that it's an absurdity, but it's a situation where your lower density zone has higher height allowance than your medium density zone. So we're recommending, and maybe I'll grant maybe we overshot here a bit, but we're recommending going to 15 meters, but recognizing that your typical 4-story building are 13 to 14 meters. So if council's fine with 15 meters, we can sort of build that into the zone bylaw, but if we want to consider a different number, 13, 14, or 16, 17, it's up to you, but we put 15 as possibly a preferred option. So parcel coverage is interesting. A lot of local government zoning bylaws will have parcel coverage. I'm not sure the basis for this, but soil use does not. Actually, that's a long-standing approach to parcel coverage. It's just never been specified. So the policy manual recommends 45%. We're recommending 45% as well, but again, we recognize that that's a major change given that the town has never had a parcel coverage regulation. So just consider that when you're looking at it. Arguably, ultimate flexibility would be not to have a parcel coverage allowance. But then we also are looking at higher density development now in low density zones. And sometimes there's a benefit to having open space, if not for amenities. Sometimes you get to go green bylaw standards for stormwater infiltration, backyard gardens, other considerations too.
With that, 45%, we have 2 houses on there. So 45.
Yeah, it'd be the footprint of all buildings, and certainly there's scope. With scope within the bylaw to define what council wants to consider when looking at parcel coverage. You could, this one here it's excluded pools, it's excluded decks, doesn't count driveways. We could exclude garages, other things to be looked at if there's concern, or increase the parcel coverage to 50% to actually have different ways to deal with it. Okay, so parcel size for subdivision, again, this isn't something that's specifically referenced in the policy manual. And I know there's different schools of thought on this. So the current parcel sizes in the residential zones range from 325 square meters to 835 square meters. It may be counterintuitive, but we're recommending the council look at actually increasing that. But the basis for their recommendation is that if we're looking at doing 3 to 4 units per parcel, your medium density zone, which is the zone that allows 3, 4, or more units per parcel, has always had, think more recently has had a parcel size requirement of 1,000 square meters. The other consideration too is that within the policy manual, although it doesn't specify it quite this way, it establishes two different design standards for development based on parcel size, and the parcel size it uses is 1,215 square meters. So again, it's establishing, you know, if you're on a larger parcel size, different design standards. The other consideration too, and I know this is more common on the island, the coast, but see here on the photo, the land assembly, generally taking single detached homes and putting the parcels together to get more land for development to allow for more units. And so if that's the case, rather than continue to encourage subdivision within residential neighborhoods, so we want to see higher density, I think we should be looking at these preserving parcels existing as they are, not fragmenting. And if possible, if subdivision is going to occur, that there's larger parcel size so that those 3 or 4 units can be more easily accommodated. I know there's a school of thought that's different approach to that, you know, smaller parcel sizes should be encouraged because each smaller parcel is going to be entitled to 3 or 4 units each. And so the more those you have, the more density you can get that way. It's a philosophical question, I suppose that council wants to look at it. So. Secondary suite floor area. So again, the province is recommending them not restrict it. The province itself amended BC Building Code in 2019 and removed all the floor area restrictions. Although local governments still didn't, they left those in their zoning bylaws. The zoning bylaws had historically been tied to the building code. The fact that council has 100 square meter current allowance suggests that you probably visited this at some point in the recent past. So we're asking you to revisit it again now to consider removing that restriction entirely as per the policy manual. So it would no longer be tied to 100 square meters. People could do a suite size they want. Okay, on-site vehicle parking, again, I would put this one right up there with setbacks in terms of potential implications for development patterns within the town. So the province's recommendation is actually to remove parking for single detached duplexes entirely. But they do make exceptions for situations where it's a smaller town in a rural setting. Again, it goes back to alternate transportation options, which are kind of limited in these situations. So the recommendation that staff is putting forward is not to follow the policy manual in this respect, but to maintain a requirement of 1 parking space per dwelling unit for single detached duplexes. And then for apartment buildings, again, recognizing the alternative transportation options available in town aren't maybe the same as you would find in the larger urban municipality of the coast. That minimum parking space requirements be retained as well. Maybe not as high as they are outside the core area at the moment. So outside the core area is 1.75. We're saying maybe reduce that to 1.5, but within the core area, maintain the existing one. So, and I know in reading the policy manual, the province is saying that this doesn't mean that there won't be on-site parking provided. So again, just trying to get to that flexibility and giving developers the option of not having to do 2 per parcel for some types of development. They may choose to, but it's not local government mandate.
So it makes a difference because we do not have bus schedules. I mean, we do, but it's not every 15 minutes. So you have to allow a little bit more flexibility with parking, right? Because people are, we encourage people to, and certainly in the OCP, to you know, densify in the downtown area so they can walk, bike, whatever, but we still need to make sure that in an area like this, that people have the ability to have cars and because they're needed.
Yeah, I think that's a recognition in locations like that, you know, cars are an effective life. People need to get them to move around in community, and the alternative transportation options just simply don't exist. So it's not realistic to think that people can live in a Soyuz without having a car, right? So that's why we're saying no parking requirements entirely.
Okay.
We think 1 per dwelling unit is appropriate.
Go ahead, Councillor King.
Yeah, I guess if you put 3 or 4 homes on a piece of land and you bring it down to one family parking, so they need 4 or just 1?
Well, if it's 4 units, there would be 4
4 parking spaces.
Yeah, 1 per.
Okay, thank you.
So I see that we've got the Prudential Policy Manual and Site Standards, the whole thing included in here. Do you see that being adjusted and changed? I mean, they've had a few changes already, haven't they? Do you think that,
Not short term.
oh, this will be,
There may be,
for here for a while?
there could be some supplementary provisions added in the future, but I suspect until after 2025 and all of the other requirements that we have to deal with are dealt with, we're implemented into your
Okay.
bylaws. I can't see the problem with having any other provisions at this point. And that brings me to the end of this particular presentation. So depending on the direction that's provided by council, I think what we're proposing to do is to build this into the new zoning bylaw
Yes,
and to bring this forward as part of its implementation. And I think we're looking at moving the zoning bylaw forward and having it adopted prior to that June 30th deadline, so that all of this is taken care of at once.
I think we required to, by June 30th.
Well, yeah, and there's different ways you could do it. We could amend the existing bylaw,
Okay,
but given the fact that we're doing its own bylaw review anyway, we would rather than spend time on the existing one,
Sure.
just focus on the draft one and get that to it.
okay. Oh, yes, Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For places like Meadowlark, which are way done and zoned, and we're saying we're talking about Meadowlark from here, how's that, if we change that, is that gonna change effectively what their design and plans are for Meadowlark? For the builder, is all something gonna be, also gonna say, no, you can't do single family, now you gotta do fourplex or 3 houses on there?
No, so the underlying theme of all of this is flexibility. And so the zoning that would be applied to Meadowlark would allow for single detached duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. It's up to them as to what development they want to do. And depending on the development, here's the setbacks that are going to apply, here's the parking provisions that are going to apply to the direction of council. We may or may not require a forming character development permit that we don't require. And then they can design accordingly as to how best to build out those lots.
So that might be an advantage then.
Yeah, I mean, of all your existing zones, the Meadowlark one is probably the one that most closely resembles the draft RS1 in terms of the range of building uses. It's just some other problematic aspects of particularly the primary designation. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're looking at the we okay with that? And do you think that's something else?
Well, so the only thing I would draw council's attention
Yeah.
to is just the building envelope that's being proposed, right? So and again, I mean, for me, the ones that like stand out would be the front setbacks for the draft zone, and also just ensuring the council's comfortable with proposed parking
Yeah,
provisions. If you're not, and again, I mean, as with height, as with parcel coverage, and as with parcel size for subdivision, if there's anything you didn't feel comfortable with in terms of the staff recommendation, that would be the time to give us direction as we start preparing the draft zone bylaw.
so we have quite a few things on the recommendation. Is there anything that that council would like to adjust or change or ask for a different opinion on that one? Then go ahead, Councillor Bennett.
Yeah, just one more question, then bed and breakfast. Like we looked at the parking and it's one per unit. And for people that have, say, a bed and breakfast or Airbnb and there's 6 cars parked on one lot. Does this take that into account?
But this doesn't address it, but it's certainly something we can take direction on in the next presentation. I think I have a slide that deals with
Yes.
home occupations and B&Bs.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Okay, are we comfortable with this? And would someone like to make a recommendation? Councillor Federica?
Your worship of the adoption.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Bennett. So that's just for the recommendations on page 79. All in favor? Thank you very much. So last one, Mr. Garish is zoning bylaw review miscellaneous items.
This one is totally unrelated to the 40. But since we're going to be down talking about everything else, and you know, because we are actually working on this accelerated, well, I say accelerated, but revised timeline for preparing a draft zoning bylaw. There was a number of issues that we were hoping to get council direction on. I think some of which have been before you previously as part of the review, and some we just picked up on as we've started to get into the zoning bylaw and look at what can be redrafted and changed or updated. Or I suppose taking inspiration from Bill 44, that flexibility provided for some of these regulations. So I'll just start with some quick background, which I'm sure council is aware of, but my understanding is the preparation of the new zoning bylaw has been ongoing since 2022. It's not just the zoning bylaw that's being looked at. There's two other components, which includes the forest, shore, and lake zoning bylaw as well as short-term rentals. Neither of which will be touched on in the presentation today, but I suspect we'll be coming back to you at some future point with some questions and requests for direction as well. And yeah, I think what I've already highlighted that in light of Bill 44 that we're looking at implementing some of this up into the zoning bylaw. So I'll jump right into it. So the first one that I had was cannabis operation. And I know this was a perplexing issue for a lot of local governments when federal government legalized it back in 2018. Yeah, and the lead up to that. And also the production end of it as well, not just the retail. So I'll start with the production end. So as I understand the town's bylaw at the moment, there is a reference to cannabis operation, which is basically the production end of it. I've got the definition up there as the first stop point. It's a use that's prohibited in all zones unless approved by council. And then interestingly, within the zoning bylaw, which is a regulatory bylaw, there's policy statements that speak to the situations in which council would consider potentially approving cannabis operation for production. And that speaks to it being on a site-specific basis and then in industrial zone. Council will look at considerations of that use on adjacent public health and safety, as well as nuisance such as smell and noise. So we've now had the benefit of 6 years since legalization and dealing with these. And I think there's only been a couple of instances where council has approved a cannabis operation on a site-specific basis in the industrial zone. And I guess looking at that now with the benefit of hindsight and considering that I'm assuming there's been no issues with these operations that have occurred, and the council's open to having indoor agriculture as a use in the industrial zones, look at providing flexibility by just allowing that as a standalone use, so that there is no need to come forward for rezonings, and that the use be expanded to not just cannabis, but also other forms of produce, flowers, nuts, etc., and just be a permitted use in the M1 zone. If council's open to that, then theoretically we wouldn't need to have the policies that are currently in the zoning bylaw that cover to the OCP. We would just treat it as permitted industrial use. So I'm not sure I can keep going, or do we want to talk?
So we get clear with that one? Yeah.
Okay. Right, and then the second part of cannabis is the retail sales. And again, I know that was a big issue a number of years ago when legalization happened. Very similar to council's approach on cannabis production. Although there's no specific definition for cannabis sales, my understanding is that it's prohibited in all zones unless approved by council on a site-specific basis. To date, there's only been one use approved. That's at 8322 Main Street. And again, just like cannabis production, there's existing policy statements within the zoning bylaw to speak to council, how council will look at proposal for zoning. So what we're hopeful, and again, just from a flexibility perspective, that you know, hopefully it's time that we can look at cannabis sales as just another retail use, and that it doesn't have to be a standalone one that requires council approval every time somebody wants to undertake it. And that if we take that as an interpretation, cannabis sales would just look at it as any other retail sale, and where the zone allows for retail sales, theoretically, then we can do cannabis out there.
Who's okay with that? Yeah, so.
All right, so home occupations, and so we can talk about B&Bs and parking here. So again, just some background context. So home occupation is a common accessory residential use in almost every, I think, local government zoning bylaw. My understanding of the intent behind it is generally to encourage entrepreneurship and provide residents opportunity to generate income from their home. And, usually a home occupation, one thinks of like, say, an accountant or a bookkeeper or, and maybe somebody making soap out of their garage, like just some kind of craft industry, they can do from home. And so it is permitted in a range of uses, which you can see here on the third dot point. And then some common elements, and again, recognizing that it generally happens in residential neighborhoods. No employees, right? It's really an accommodation for the existing residents. Shouldn't be any outdoor storage associated with the use. And that if there is a requirement for anybody to visit the dwelling in relation to the use, that there's sufficient on-site vehicle parking provided. Now, I know it's obscured a little bit here on the side, but what struck us in relation to the current zone bylaws, that it's a very prescriptive use class at the moment, so it's almost 2 pages of regulations related to home occupations, and I didn't intend for this to be legible. I just wanted to highlight, the scrolling nature of the regulations, and we think that there is an opportunity maybe to simplify this and just have it as a standard where we move away from what's the current level 1 versus level 2. There's a provision for discretion to the Director of Development Services to approve these things, but they don't fit the range of levels. Also, very prescriptive in terms of what dwellings or accessory structures the different levels can occur in, and whatnot. So we included in an attachment to the report a possible preferred alternative. We were just standardized that home occupation is accessory residential use. Here's what's not a home occupation. It can occur in the house or in an accessory structure, standard floor area allowance, and that's it. Pretty straightforward. But as part of that, we separate out bed and breakfast as its own use class, and that it be not really considered a home occupation anymore. And again, I say that in a sense that it really is 2 separate things sometimes, and then also looking ahead, depending on what comes out of the vacation rental review component of the zoning bylaw review, having bed and breakfast as standalone use now might be beneficial if there's a desire to deal with vacation rentals and Airbnbs as a separate use for residential neighborhoods. So we can make that change now. So.
Okay with that? You were asking about parking with that. Is that included in the B&Bs?
Yes,
Yeah.
so my understanding is that, and I have to confirm this, but we can certainly take different direction, that for each bedroom unit, parking space is provided. If that's too onerous, then we can certainly look at reducing it.
It seems reasonable to me, but I'm not sure what everybody else thinks. If you're renting out 3 separate units, then you should have enough parking for those, I
Yeah.
think.
So the only clarification I would provide for council benefit is that a B&B is historically understood to be different from a vacation rental, and that the occupant of the dwelling is in the house
Yes.
at the same time as the patrons. And it's not a situation where they're walled off from each other. They're all in the same unit, using the same facilities, including the same kitchen. So in those scenarios, if they're renting out 3 bedrooms to 3 different guest groups, then they should be providing 3 different parking spaces. Is how I think the bylaw is currently structured. But yeah, I mean, that can be looked at council.
Are we okay with that, or, okay, it seems to me it makes sense, yeah. Unless they're gonna change it, I mean, do you think the government's gonna say we don't have to do that because they're all the same?
No,
Oh, okay,
I can't see that, but I can see maybe some recommendations coming out of the vacation rental review
Okay.
in relation to short-term accommodation in houses and how parking is provided and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so mobile vendor, so we're aware that the town issues business licensing for these, and the thing that caught our attention is that there's references to mobile trucks being permitted, or sorry, mobile vendors being permitted on commercially zoned land with a minimum of 10 parking spaces. So not necessarily a big deal, but the zone bylaw, the current zone bylaw is silent on this issue. And so if that's council's preference, we can certainly build that into the new zoning bylaw. And I think we're recommending that actually maybe a more broader approach be taken with mobile vendors. Because our experience has been is that they will sometimes show up at the wineries.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if the wineries are in town, but if there is and they're using that way, then that's probably an agricultural zoning. Sometimes the hotels or motels or other tourist locations might have a food truck show up. in which case it may not just be commercial zoning, it could also be tourist commercial zoning. They may show up in the industrial parks, to accommodate demand up there. And also you may find them on their own parks, town owned land, which isn't necessarily commercially zoned, so. Again, flexibility, build that into the zoning bylaw. And if there is a desire to have a required on-site number of spaces in terms of 10, we could look then as a zoning requirement, or it could be just out with through policy business licensing. But we do think there should be some clarity provided around this if we are issuing building license, or sorry, business license.
Okay. I think that makes sense. You okay with that?
So this one kind of ties back to the earlier discussion around density and residential flexibility, the downtown to commercial zone, which is C1. So the OCP speaks to situations where I think council would be open to a site-specific zoning if certain criteria were being met. Yeah, so this is the criteria that would be considered. Then of course that requires a rezoning proposal. So what we're asking for is based on that policy, sorry, I'm all over the place here. I'm gonna back a little bit. So the C1 zone, it contemplates residential uses occurring. The OCP says that maybe in future we can do those on a dedicated basis where there is no commercial on the ground floor. We notice that the C1 zone has restrictions where it's prohibited certain uses from occurring on Main Street, such as car wash, bottle depot, pawn shop. So then we start thinking, okay, well, there are other uses that we could do with that too. And we notice that there's an allowance for single detached dwellings, which basically allows these to be maintained. But if the idea is to encourage increased residential densities in the C1 zone, allowing single detached may not be ideal. This is the criteria. So, sorry, convoluted, get to the recommendation. Given everything that we saw in the zone, I guess what we're asking council is would it be open to flexibility in order to allow for dedicated residential buildings in the C1 zone off of Main Street, right? Like if the idea of the mixed use C1 zone is to ensure that there's commercial occurring on the ground floor, we think that makes a lot of sense in relation to Main Street, but off of Main Street. And given that zone bylaws current approach is already kind of limiting uses based on what street it's fronting, maybe we could look at allowing for dedicated residential buildings in the C1 zone off of Main Street where there is not necessarily commercial on the ground floor. And then that saves people in certain circumstances having to come to get a site-specific rezoning from council. So again, remove a regulatory hurdle, create some flexibility, but make sure that we're preserving commercial on the ground floor on Main Street.
Go ahead, Councillor James.
So if that change comes through, you could still have residential or commercial on those streets off Main Street. You could have either, right?
Yeah.
All right with that? Okay, thank you.
So gas stations, so I know this comes up sometimes as a controversial issue. I don't know if that's been a Soyuz's experience, but we thought we'd float this to see if you had any perspective on this or preference. So at the moment, your highway commercial and your service commercial zones allow for gas stations as a permitted right. So there's no approval required from council, but just given their nature and their impact on adjacent parcels and the fact that they are handling flammable or hazardous materials, maybe having those as a permitted use isn't appropriate. So ironically, I think in this case, we're actually asking council to maybe take a more inflexible approach to service stations. But it does give you control over where they locate, when they locate, maybe some concerns. So what we're proposing is that for the existing gas stations that occur within town, and this is my understanding of the four that do exist, and others, Petro-Canada, but I believe that's out on the Soyuz Indian Band.
Yes.
So these are the four that exist. These are the zones that apply to them. We simply introduce a new zone for gas stations and apply that zone to these parcels. And in doing so, what would happen then is if they wanted to do a new gas station in the future, would have to come to council to get a rezoning and demonstrate that that's a suitable location for the gas station.
Yeah, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question would be if one of the service stations burned down, or let's say next door, we have the tire shop. And the guy's running, he has a fire, and then all of a sudden, what happens? Does he just get grandfathered back in the zone, they can rebuild? Or is this where it comes in, a certain percentage burns and then they have to move it out of town?
Well, that would be a policy question for council. What we're proposing is that the new zone would allow for a gas station. If we apply it to the existing gas stations that they burn down, that zone would allow them to redevelop. No question asked, but you could certainly render existing gas stations legally non-conforming, in which case then they'd have to come back and ask for approval for the rezoning, but that's not, I mean, it's an option, but it's not what staff are recommending.
Okay, the only one I'm concerned about is the tire shop, because it's not a gas station, we identified these four zones.
Is it,
We have the tire shop next door here.
yeah, this is not one of these properties shown up here.
No, it's not.
It's just something you should think about.
Yeah, I'll take a note of that one and
Yeah.
just see what the proposed zone changes, how that might impact.
Thank you.
It's on Highway 3 and 74th is the cross section.
Okay, we're getting close to the end. Okay, so this is one where I mentioned, I think council was previously given direction on this, but because of all the 44 changes, we want to come back and just reconfirm the position stands. And so I believe at your meeting last October, direction was given, if I understand it correctly, to allow for four hens to be permitted in the R, or sorry, keeping of four hens to be permitted in the R1 zone. And at that time, the R1 zone allowed for 1 12-unit home and no accessory homes, but of course now the 44s have. So any of those parcels that were in the R1 zone in October are now going to be in the zone that allows for up to 4 units to happen. Those 4 units can be some detached duplex, townhouse, or apartment. And so the density of those parcels is significantly increased. And so is that still the preferred approach? Because I understood there might have been some direction from council that you were open to 4 hens in that zone because it was a very low density zone.
It seems to me that one of the things that we had talked about at that time was the setbacks. And that was quite important to us, that there would be enough room to put them in. And I don't remember the exact issues, what the setbacks were, but I do think that if the setbacks are not available, then the hens are not available. That's what I would see that as.
Yeah. So we could certainly add exceptions to the setbacks for livestock structures like a hen house, right? And increase. I guess the question for us was if the density of these parcels is increasing, potentially having 3 to 4 units per parcel, each unit wants hens. Are you still comfortable with that in zone?
I don't think so. No, I think it was just if there was enough room and it wasn't, yeah, I don't think you could, I think we need to look at that whole issue again, for sure.
Assume we'll take the same position on honeybees.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so this one, and I'm certainly looking in a different direction from council, but I understand just going through some previous council reports that the issue of residential occupancies of RVs, specifically apartment levels, was an issue 2 or 3 years ago in relation to a number of campground sites in town, and at that time, a commitment was made to review this with council and try to address it as part of the drafting of the new zoning bylaw. Unfortunately, we're just concerned now that with where we're at and the pending deadline as a result of Bill 44, and I know from doing similar work in electoral areas that this can become a really hot issue. That maybe there's benefit to deferring this till after the new zoning bylaw is adopted and come back, revisit it as opposed to trying to do it in the time that's available to us now. So the recommended, and sorry, and this is my understanding of some of the sites in question and how they're currently being used and the types of structures that are going in there and whatnot. And I put this one in, and again, I'm going to plead ignorance, so I misunderstand the situation, but it's got a different zoning than these two. These are C5. I think I'm having a hard time seeing here. It's either R8 or R6, maybe it's R6. So I'm assuming the council has dealt with this issue previously in relation to campgrounds, that's why different zoning was applied to this one and the previous, and maybe that's something we need to do. But maybe it's preferable to do that after the zoning was adopted. So the option here is that it be deferred, but certainly if council has a different preference, we can look at maybe some short-term provisions, such as clarifying RVs and campground. The campgrounds are intended for the traveling public, not residential use. And that maybe there's a need to rezone some of these RV parks to manufactured home park if they're primarily being used as residential. But I get that this is a big topic and there's something to do later in the year.
Okay, Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I agree, because a lot of these places now are probably 70% modular homes, and there's only maybe 20 out of 100 campsites that are being rented. And they're only rented in the summer by the night, and in the winter time, they're snowbirds. And snowbirds are here 3 to 6 months, so 30 days doesn't work, so I think there's more to look at.
All right, getting close. So neighborhood consent. So we noticed this in the bylaw too, and I mean, it does cause us some concern. And that it's potentially an unlawful delegation of council authority. If we're understanding what it's actually setting out properly, which thus appears to be that if the property owner can get the consent of 75% of their neighbors within 100 meters, that they can put aside a bylaw regulation and build to a different fence height or park more commercial vehicles that the bylaw allows. Really, that's a decision for council. You can't delegate that out to residents in that way. And so, yeah, a lot of concern around that we're recommending that this not be carried forward into the new zoning bylaw and that be cut out. So that's it. And happy to answer.
Thank you very much. Thank heavens that Mr. Garish understands all these issues so well that he can explain them all and talk for so long. Thank you so much, Mr. Garish, for all of the information. And we're happy to have you continue to work with the planning department to make sure we go through with these. So we have a recommendation on as option 1, and I'm wondering what council would like to do with that. You okay?
Yeah.
And Councillor King is seconding that. All in favor? Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Davis. Thank you for waiting on the line. And so you have one more issue that we're going to talk to, and that would be the childcare needs assessment. Go ahead, please, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Council. Before you is the final report for the childcare needs assessment. We undertook this originally in order to make sure that we have this type of report ready and prepared in the need of getting in a grant funding, and also to make sure and identify any requirements where we could be proactive. So before council, we want to make sure that this childcare needs assessment report is out for information, and that the committee recommend to council administration works on the specific short-term goals. Specifically, those would be the Community Services Department to establish a cross-sectoral committee of key partners to monitor the action plan, to formalize out-of-school programming to function as out-of-school care, investigate a repayable education fund or bursary for Osoyoos residents, students who want to pursue a career in early childhood education, and updating zoning bylaws to allow childcare facilities to be in areas that are currently restricted. I'm not sure if you want to talk about any more zoning bylaw updates, but that was part of the recommendation. Most of these and what we can actually do, depending on the committee's approach, is establish another committee. And the majority of these other items, some of which are quick fixes, like the formalize the school programming as out of school care, we can take that on quite easily. But the larger issues and the ones that are reflective of financial restraints in terms of the an education fund, etc. Just having that committee and getting that feedback and possibly, opening the doors for more funding, whether it's grant opportunities or funding, a joint effort. So that's my report.
Thank you. I just had one question. I'm wondering about the third option, the repayable education fund or bursary for students. Could that be considered as a grant and aid? Would that fit in there, or would that be considered as part of the community services department to look at key partners? Could that be included in there or not?
Madam Mayor, I think the way our current policy is written, when we actually give a grant, it's a grant. We may have to go back and review and look at the policy to see if we can include that, and if council feels that should be included for that purpose. But I think that could be an option for sure.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Go ahead, Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just put forward option 1 dot and the first dot only. I set up the committee. And I think from the committee, you can work forward through the other items on there. That's my recommendation.
So you're.
Option 1, but just dot 1 dot and the first dot.
And not do the other 3 dots.
No.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Bennett? Could you elaborate a little bit on why that was your recommendation?
Well, I think you get a broad context of that committee that are more in tune to childcare and the needs and working and getting more feedback and not trying to make these decisions ourselves.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The reason I'd second it is this basically, I don't think our staff has time to do this.
And so you're looking at it as a committee that would deal with that.
Yeah, really help.
But it's gotta come back to us from the committee.
I'm not sure that we could, that the fourth one, the update the zoning bylaws, perhaps that should be done quickly because zoning bylaws need to be done by June. So I would hate to see that one left out, if that's necessary, that's all.
But I guess community services couldn't update that bylaw. We gotta wait till the presenter just previous comes back with zoning bylaw changes. So I can't see how we can even look at that one right now, personally.
Okay, I just thought we should recommend it to the zoning bylaw, people doing the zoning bylaws, that could be
Well, I think
included.
that would be a side motion to recommend it to them.
Okay.
We're talking about this childhood needs assessment.
Anybody else? So we have a motion on the floor that would be recommended. The recommendation is that we only go with bullet number 1. And I will ask did you have a question first? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My concern with just going with bullet number 1 is there are a lot of families out in our community which are in need of childcare. And by excluding the bottom 3 bullet points, we just increase the time frame in which we can actually have some of these specific goals accomplished.
Go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just as a point, I think the recommendations that I'm bringing forward for deliberation, it wouldn't be just an approach from the community services department, but more of administration as a whole. So anything that we would have in terms of zoning bylaw updates and those kind of things, it would be shared with our planning department, our corporate services department, etc. The bigger item here, and like I said, one of the quick fixes for sure, just formalizing the out of school programming. It's stuff that we do now, but we do have the resources to do that. We're talking about, extending some hours for some after school programming to help accommodate parents' needs that are currently needed. And that were addressed and identified in the report.
Thank you. So I'm going to call the question. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do echo the same concern, I think right now, as we're looking, especially with Mr. Garrish working on the zone bylaw, that is pretty important that please be examine what those opportunities are moving forward on this, being that, we're hoping to have that particular part, wrapped up by June.
Okay. So we'll go back to the motion that's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion? Against? Thank you. That did not pass. So is there someone who would like to go ahead, Councillor John?
I'd like to move out option 1 with all 4 points.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Second, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Are there any other concerns, questions?
I would also like to volunteer as the council rep for the committee as well.
If we come to that, we will certainly consider it. Okay, I will, it's been moved and seconded that we go with all 4 points that were recommended. All in favor? Against? Councillor, that is, that's passed. Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. We hope that you will be looking at getting a community services department committee set up fairly soon. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of our committee of the whole meeting. Moved and seconded that the